Oh, now opening it up for the,
High functioning, borderline geniuses. There you go. There you go.
wonderful. We love it.
It's a
nice.
lot of fun. Yeah.
That's great.
If I don't know my contacts, I take these baking.
Good evening. I will open up the public hearing for the Liberty High School Phase 2 project.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the Liberty High School Phase 2 project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on November 28th, 2017. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on November 29th, 2017. The district will receive bids on this project at 10 a.m. on January 11th, 2018, at the Educational Services Center located at 1725 North Dodge Street, Iowa City, Iowa 52245. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide planned rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on November 29th, 2017. Are there any questions from the board?
Yeah, Dwayne, can you just give us a quick overview of what all is involved in Phase 2?
Be happy to. Phase 2 is basically the athletic venue for Liberty High School. It includes football stadium, baseball, softball, tennis, soccer, some practice fields, and a couple concession stand type buildings, as well as the grandstand for the football field.
Are there any questions from the public? I declare this public hearing closed.
And with that, I will open up our school board meeting. I will call this meeting to order on December 12th. My name is Janet Godwin. I want to thank you all for being here tonight in the audience, for those watching on television and those for following along on Twitter. I'll start by introducing those at the table with me. To my right, Superintendent Steve Murley, Directors Ruthina Malone, Phil Hemingway, Lori Rotland, J.P. Clausen, Sean Eystone, Paul Ressler, and Recording Secretary Kim Colvin. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak, they need to complete a speaker form found at the table in the lobby and turn it in. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting during the community comment section of the agenda. And with that, we'll move to student representative updates. Do we have City High representation? Tegan, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, board members. I am happy to report that the Jazz and Show Choir Winter Show was last Saturday and was an outstanding success. Last Friday, we also had a prep rally that celebrated our diverse interests, from student government to performing arts to the various winter sports that are playing this winter season. City's FTC robotics team have begun competition. Best of luck to them. As well as beginning to practice for their competition is the I'll Make Me a World Black History Show team. Game show team, which is practicing for their January competition. And finally, Mock Trial is getting geared up for their case, which they will be receiving soon. This is the case that they will be competing with in their journey to state, and they hope to win it all at state. City High will be having its winter dance this Saturday with a focus on having a more diverse selection of music to be played during the dance. As well, Student Senate is working on raising funds and pounds of food for the Crisis Center of Johnson County. So far, we have raised over $300 for that endeavor. So, hooray. In sports news, our basketball program is doing outstandingly. Last Friday, the girls' basketball all teams toppled the number 1 ranked team in the state in Cedar Falls, and our boys beat the number 3 team here at home. On Thursday, the City West wrestling meet will be taking place at City High School. It will be a pack the gym night as we attempt to break the attendance record of past meets. Thank you all to the Board of Directors, and have a happy holiday season.
Thank you. You too. West High, Zena Mackey or Ala Ali?
evening. So I'll also be starting on choir. Last Wednesday, 3 choirs performed at King's Chapel on the campus of Cornell College, and the concert was designed to use the natural acoustics of the chapel and also included the West High Chamber Orchestra. For a taste of the shows, view Dr. Schultz tweets, which includes most of the acts. Secondly, our speech and debate Dowling competed at Dowling, and the champions this year were Chirag Jain and Mason Wang. So congratulations to them. No Shave November was a huge success this year, and over $3,000 was collected for the West High Dance Marathon this month. The top 3 teachers were Byron Butler, Jeff Connor, and Cody Poodle. All proceeds go to the Stead Family Hospital. And our food drive started last week on the 4th and will run through December 22nd. And all proceeds will go to Johnson County Crisis Center. So next, for amazing news, 6 West students who took the ACT this fall earned perfect scores of 36. These students are Colleen Blozer, Quinn Baker, Yang Chen Ching Wan, Winjel Zhu, Lin Zhu, and Stephen Yuan. The West High Palm State Championship placed 3rd in jazz, 4th in competitive palms category, and 5th in contemporary dance, giving them a top 5 place in all 3 categories. And third, for very exciting news, Harvard researchers are coming to West High with the goal of making non-evaluative observations in classroom to observe the racial climate and to also observe diversity. So that will be all for my report. Thank you.
Thank you. You also turned in a speaker form. Was this the update that you were planning to make, or did you have other comments during community comment?
No, that's all.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Tate High, Savannah. Wasn't able to make it? How about Liberty High, Shane? No. Okay, well, thank you all, students, for your updates. We'll turn to ICEA update.
Hi, President Godwin, Directors, Superintendent Murley, Secretary Colvin. Our student at Liberty has a choir concert tonight. I'll just put that out here, so he's not able to make it. I just wanted to run through, we have legislative priorities. I see legislative sort of update is on the agenda for tonight. We do have some priorities as our association. We have 5 that we're working on. A complete and quick restoration of collective bargaining rights that were found under Chapter 20. This is at the top of our agenda. We're calling for timely and appropriate funding of public education through an SSA amount of no less than 4%. I think that's been consistent with our administrative teams as well. We're pretty we're watching this year for sure. The maybe some of the efforts are going to be out there on private school vouchers, education savings accounts, and other privatization schemes. We're opposed to those. We think that those are going to take money away from the public schools. We'd like to see the extension of SAVE dollars, and we want those dollars to go exclusively to infrastructure and technology used for our public schools. There's been some conversation about using that to help with our water quality issue. Our position has been that the voters did approve a 3/8 penny for water quality and other environmental issues, and you have the means to do that outside of SAVE. So we would like to see extension of SAVE and the money going directly to the public schools. And then we're happy to hear that the report from the IPERS board came back that even though we'll be increasing contribution amounts and they've lowered our overall growth estimates, that they are maintaining IPERS at this stage as a defined benefit system. And that's something that we want to see happen and continue for sure. That's of great concern for a lot of state employees and certainly our members. And just a little bit out there in advance, but January 27th is the League of Women Voters of Johnson County Legislative Forum. That's a Saturday, January 27th. It's the education focus, and I know Superintendent Murley will talk about that more, not this meeting, but at a future meeting. But that's one that we co-host with the district and with some university people. It's at the Iowa City Public Library this year. It's been at the City Council chambers, but it's at the public library. We'd love to see you there. So Saturday the 27th for that forum. So thank you.
Thanks, Brady.
Brady, what time is that forum? Is it 7?
That
1?
forum is usually, I think, at like 9 in the morning.
Okay.
Yep. You're welcome.
Hey Brady, one more thing as you
Yeah.
before you step away, as you're kind of the Liberty representative, although you're not right now.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but congratulations to Liberty on your first state championship.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And dance.
And dance. We had, they took home 2 titles in dance, and they have quite a committed crew of young women and dancers. I have some of them in class, so I appreciate the shout out to them. The amount of time, and this is true, of course, of all of our students in the district, that they put in outside of the school day is just phenomenal. When I start to complain about, I had to grade until 9, and they say, well, we started rehearsal at 9. And so, but yeah, thanks. They did a nice job.
That's great. Congratulations. Okay, thank you so much. We'll move into the community comment section. Thank you for your interest in Iowa City Community School District and for your willingness to share your comments. You are reminded to give your name, address, and topic on which you would like to speak. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting and shall be limited to 4 minutes per speaker. The initial community comment period shall be limited to 1 hour. Remaining community comment, to the extent necessary, shall take place at the end of the meeting. To the extent you are commenting on items not on our posted agenda, the board may ask follow-up questions of speakers, but is prohibited by the Iowa Open Meetings Law from responding to questions from speakers or from engaging in substantive discussions regarding non-agenda items. So first up, we have Susan Brennan, who's going to be doing a check presentation, and following Susan, we've got Police Chief Jody Matterly.
Great, thank you. Good evening. My name's Susan Brennan. I'm with the Iowa City Community School District Foundation, and I'm here tonight to do a couple check presentations, and I'm going to let them really define what their program's about, but want to do a public thank you. Both of these programs, the Classroom Cash program and our Run for the Schools program, exist solely to benefit our schools, and the funds that are raised through these programs really are what allow the foundation to grow. And Steve and his team, when they come to us, which they do with a fair amount of regularity, with new great ideas, this is the funds we look to say, can we do it? Can we afford to take it on? And so it is critically important to the foundation, and I just can't thank both of them enough for what they do for our schools and our students. So I would like to introduce some of the folks from the Run for the Schools, the Iowa City Board of Directors, and I'm going to try really hard to get their names correct. Bob Opliger, no N, Beth Menser, Joan DePranger, and Matt Fettkether. You guys come on up. I got that right this time, didn't I?
Hi, I'm Joan DePranger, and I'm president of the Iowa City Road Races, and I'm representing the board, and I have fellow board members behind me. First of all, I I'm excited to say that we raised a fair amount of money this year on our road race. Our numbers were down a little bit, but our income was as high and our expenses were, tried to cut it down a little bit to make up for it. The check that we're presenting tonight is $27,397.32. In addition to that, schools who met, elementary schools and junior high and high schools who met a certain level of participation were allowed to apply or were designated that they received an additional funding up to $250 for the PE department and another $250 for the school library. So in addition to the $27,000 that we're giving tonight, we earlier gave $7,600 to individual schools. On top of that, the Iowa City Foundation did their own fundraising and did some letters and matches with that, and they raised another $22,000. So the total raised for the Run for the Schools this year was $57,000, $57,661.32. Right? Yes. We recognize the top 3 elementary schools by participation percents. So Hoover was the highest percent. They may not have had the highest numbers, but the percent was highest. So Hoover had 16%, Shimmick was 15%, and Lincoln was 12.6%. So those schools were recognized with that. In addition to the board members here, Susan Brennan is an ex officio member of our board and does an outstanding job of representing the district and coming to us with great ideas in her role as representing Iowa City. Teresa Weeks is also a foundation employee for Iowa City and serves on our race operations board, which is a race operations committee, which is separate, kind of the logistics of how you run the road race. And she put a lot of time into organizing, especially all the volunteers that we had. We had parents, student, staff volunteers that counted as participants in any of our schools representing that. Midwest One is our title sponsor. I want to recognize them. They donated $15,000 right off the bat, and they are on board for another couple years with that. And Matt's a representative of Midwest One. This next year, we are working on our 30th year. I haven't been with him, 20th year. I've been with him almost almost as much, but not 20 years. But we are up to 20 years, and we raised so far to date over $900,000 for the schools. And our goal next year is to kind of have a continue with a big bang to raise that level to $1 million to get that level. So we're going to be looking, see what we can to increase our participants and look at some additional sponsors with that.
Well, again, thank you so much. I can tell you, being an ex officio, the planning that goes into this is incredible. We, right after our October race, start planning for next year. So it's a pretty incredible thing that these folks do for our schools. So we want to do a quick picture and check presentation, so Janet and Steve, and then we'll do one more after that if we can do that real quick. Actually, should we go ahead and do the other one? And let's do that. So we pull them out one time. But you guys stay close. Okay, the other program that I want to recognize tonight is with Hills Bank. This is our Classroom Cash program. If you are a Hills Bank customer and you use your debit card, some of that comes back to the schools. And so I'd like to introduce Hills Bank's representative, Kenzie Hines, and Tom, I always want to call him Tommy Heinrich.
Whoops. Good evening. That's a hard presentation to follow. 900,000. So my name's Kenzie Hine, and this is Tom Heinrich, and we are very pleased to be here to represent Hills Bank and Trust Company. We're here this evening to talk to you about Classroom Cash, which is a Hills Bank program that shares a portion of the revenue from debit card usage with a customer's school district of choice. So the Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, and Hills communities are a major part of our market, and that's good news for the Iowa City Community School District. We are pleased to present a check today to the Iowa City Community School District Foundation for $11,190.54, which represents the Classroom Cash revenue for the last 6 months, so March to October. To date, over $384,436.42, that 42 cents is very important, has been contributed to the Iowa City School District through the Classroom Cash program. So, thank you.
Again, thank you so much. 2 examples of how both funds have gone to use in the recent past is Makerspaces, which you might know are in all of our secondary buildings, was funded primarily through these programs, and partnership that we have right now with Equal Opportunity Schools that we're again doing in our secondary buildings came through this funding. So let's grab, if we could, a couple quick photos.
And why don't
Can
give
we
these
say a big
people round of
thanks?
applause,
Yes.
too? Well, we can do it again when we're done with the photos. We can block 2 or 3 times, that's okay.
Can you get faces from behind?
Thank you again for that fantastic contribution to the district. So up next is our police chief, and on deck after Jody will be Charlie Eastham.
Don't have to pay attention tonight. Sitting in everybody's lap here.
Good evening, folks. Thank you, President Godwin and the board, for allowing me a few minutes to be here. I'm just here to introduce myself. I never want to follow an act where they're given large quantities of cash. It's not good. My name's Jody Matherly. I've been the police chief since January, coming 34 years of law enforcement experience, starting in Michigan, then to Grinnell in 2003. For 9 years, Altoona PD as chief there for 5 years, and now I'm here in Iowa City. And I can tell you I've landed, I've found my home. This is a wonderful community, a very supportive community. We have a great group of officers and staff at the Iowa City Police Department. But also what I've found is as we do and enhance our community outreach, we do everything from neighborhood meetings to community meetings to businesses and groups. And one important piece of that is certainly the school district. We do work hand in hand with you folks in many projects in many different ways, from helping train to keep a safe environment in your school, to a resource for your faculty and staff, and also to assist us in community outreach and fostering relationships with the children. And we have a great captive audience, if you will, when we're dealing with the schools and having the students right there. So my big thing tonight is just to let you know that we are a resource at your fingertips. If there's anything we can do to enhance and assist you in achieving great results, don't hesitate to ask that. I worked in Flint, Michigan, where it was the birthplace of school liaison and SROs, to communities where there was no formal system, but certainly a good collaborative effort. So at any level that you folks feel are fruitful and effective in keeping, doing your jobs as a board, the administration, and keeping a safe environment and a very efficient environment, don't hesitate to reach out. So we're here for you. So that's all I have, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you.
Charlie? And following Charlie will be Allison Hart.
I probably should not try to follow presentation of cash and the Iowa City Police Chief, but I will do my best. Actually, I want to talk very briefly tonight about rubberized playground surfaces and the Appendix 9 process, and I'll try to bring those two things together. I want to say before I begin, President Goodwin and Superintendent Murley, I'm intending my remarks and ideas to be helpful, so I appreciate that. As many of you know, rubberized playground surfaces have been a topic of which I think many of us are concerned with, and I think, frankly, most board members are in favor of installing rubberized playground surfaces on at least most, if not all, of the elementary school playgrounds. This came up, actually, the Equity Committee a couple of meetings ago passed a recommendation that the district install rubberized playground surfaces on all the elementary school playgrounds. And the newly formed MSD PTO meeting that was held a couple of weeks ago, attended by Board Member Clausen and Board Member Hemingway, as well as myself, that discussion came up, and there was a discussion about how the board could actually go about doing this. And so I just have this comments about how to do that. The Appendix 9 process, as you all know, is a way for the board to approve facilities improvements of various kinds. Tonight, on your Appendix 9 calendar or agenda item, you're talking about the Alexander Elementary School addition, athletic courts, fields, and playgrounds is a topic that involves the Shimmick School. The Christine Grant new elementary school is on the Appendix 9 agenda item, as well as is an item regarding the Mann elementary school renovation. The idea that I think we talked about at the MSD PTO meeting was maybe the board members could ask the administration during consideration of Appendix 9 items to include rubberized surfaces at the elementary schools that those Appendix 9 items refer to. Tonight, the Christine Grant Appendix 9 item is a recommendation to approve design development plans for the new elementary school. To me, that's if the board members wanted to, you could include rubberized surfaces at that new elementary school during your discussion tonight. The same thing applies to Alexander, where you're including new classrooms at Alexander, which does not yet have a rubberized playground surface. So to me, perhaps you could consider asking for the administration to go ahead with installation of rubberized playground surfaces at Alexander as part of the classroom extension process. I know the funding is not quite right, but perhaps you could do that. Same thing applies to the Mann Elementary School renovation, where you're going actually to consider approving a fairly technical part of the planning process, but still, I don't think Mann has a rubberized playground surface right now, and if it's renovated, perhaps that could be included. The same thing applies to Shimmick. Shimmick, to your appendix 9 item, is a little bit more removed from playground surfaces, but perhaps you could find a way to do that. So that's my discussion. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Allison.
Hi, my name is Allison Hart, and I have 2 children at Lincoln Elementary. As a parent in the North Lincoln attendance zone, I'm extremely concerned about the future attendance plan for my children. My primary concerns are that 1, they will be bused for over 10 miles from our house to school next year, most likely including 5 miles on Interstate 80. And 2, there is no attendance plan for our children beginning in 2019. These issues are disruptive to my children's education and place a huge burden on the students and families in the North Lincoln area. Last week, Craig Hansel and Esme Davis came to the Lincoln PTO meeting to discuss bus transportation for Lincoln students to New Hoover next year. Many parents requested more information on the bus routes for next year, but Mr. Hansel and Ms. Davis told us that it is impossible to create the routes until next July because of limitations with the computer software. That was hard for us to believe. However, Mr. Hansel said that they are required to use the most efficient route to the school, which for North Lincoln will be on Interstate 80. According to Google Maps, the fastest route from North Lincoln to New Hoover includes a 5-mile stretch on I-80. I don't believe that any other elementary students in the district are bused for such a long distance on I-80, and Ms. Davis confirmed that there will be no seatbelts on the buses. Many people that I've spoken with feel so uncomfortable having their children ride a bus on I-80 for such a long distance that they plan to drive the children themselves next year for the 10 to 12-mile trip, which is a huge burden for them. I've also talked to many families who would like to try to transfer out of Lincoln next year rather than attend New Hoover, but Mr. Hansel assured us that is not an option because every school around us is already overcrowded. Mr. Hansel told us that having Longfellow at New Hoover has been great this year. Some Longfellow kids even get to walk to school. They had been bused previously. It was totally irrelevant to our situation. We're not going to walk to school. Instead, our option is to put our children on a bus with no seatbelts on an interstate full of semis. Your plan to send us to New Hoover has left us with no good options. Parents are left deciding whether to drive their kids, which would take about 80 minutes per day, or put them on a bus that they feel is unsafe, or move. However, it's difficult to sell homes in North Lincoln right now because no one knows where we will be redistricted in 2019. We were promised that after being sent so far away for the 2018 school year, the following year we would be rewarded with a new neighborhood school, but that is no longer in the plan. I understand that a complicating factor in the redistricting plan for 2019 is that an elementary school on the Scanlon property will be needed in the near future. If built soon, this could lead to our neighborhood being assigned to 4 elementary schools in 5 or 6 years. If the Scanlon Elementary is likely to be developed in the next few years, you should consider leaving North Lincoln at Lincoln Elementary until that school does open. If the Scanlon Elementary is not going to be built soon, then the new Grant Elementary seems like a good option for us, and it would displace the least amount of students out of Garner and Penn. You've not asked North Lincoln parents where they want their children to attend school in 2019. You need to reach out and ask them what they want. We deserve to have input in this decision. This is the same neighborhood that has been sent to all 3 high schools over the course of 6 years. Since the current plan to renovate Lincoln is over budget, an ideal solution would be to create a plan to renovate Lincoln that would allow it to remain open next year. That would eliminate one of the transitions for our children. Schools are normally renovated while students attend them. Much larger schools in the district, such as Penn and City High, have been renovated without shutting down for a year. Asbestos removal and window replacement can be completed over a summer, and portables can be used as necessary throughout the school year. It's hard to believe that a complete shutdown is absolutely necessary. Many of you were not board members when these decisions were made for Lincoln. And those who were, you can and should always change the plan when you find a better path forward for students. We are in a window where you can make a difference for these students and families and make this better for us. I hope that you can come up with another plan for North Lincoln that will create more consistency and security for our children. Thank you.
Is it possible for you to, I was trying to take notes, but I'm not that fast. Would it be possible to get a copy of your presentation to?
Can I email it to you?
That'd be perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison. And there is a topic later in the agenda tonight to discuss the process for the attendance zone for Christine Grant that would include the North Lincoln area as well. So we're working on developing that process, which will include community input as well. So that's on the agenda a little bit later tonight. Thank you. So that does conclude the community comment section. Thank you all so much for coming and sharing your perspectives for us. It's extremely helpful. With that, we will move into our consent agenda.
Yeah, I'd like to pull items 6 and 7.
I move that we approve the consent agenda minus items 6 and 7.
I second it.
Phil, you reviewed the bills, and I actually participated
Yes,
this
you did.
time.
Yes,
Any
you did,
comments or
Janet.
questions from that review?
Right, and you had some very good questions, and I brought those questions to Dr. Hansel, and he provided us an email response to those questions. Tonight, we're approving $3.8 million with $124,000 going to the GO bond. So all the questions that you and I both had were answered and corrected. So
Thank you, Phil, for that update. Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open.
Yay, I wasn't logged in, sorry.
Thank you. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you, Kim. Next up, we have board work, and the first topic is the director liaison reports. Those materials were part of the agenda. Are there any comments that board members would like to make about any of their activities this last period?
I didn't get my liaison report in yet, but it will be accompanying later, and it'll be, Kim can attach it to it. I just didn't get it prepared quick enough.
I'll just comment very quickly that, Phil and I were at that MSD PTO, and it was good, a really robust discussion, really passionate group of folks. Different kind of concept to have a PTO that's not just centered on a school, but rather around a large group of students that's trying to be really inclusive. And so I know I really learned a lot and really appreciated that meeting.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I think it's kind of an overdue outlet for special ed parents. One other thing I might just quick mention, I did spend December 1st with Assistant Superintendent Matt Degner and Principal Scott Kibbe and Steve Miller touring 2 high schools in the Des Moines area, Southeast Polk and Des Moines Central Campus. And they're doing some amazing things with the career and technical education, and we'll be sharing information with that as we go forward. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you. The next item is the legislative update, and I would just like to point out that this is a very, very good opportunity for school board members to meet with state legislators. There's a meeting this Friday. It was referenced earlier in the conversation tonight, and in the materials in the board packet, you see the monthly forums that are established all the way through April. So, Steve, anything to add to that?
Sure. So just a quick summary of that. So we invite all of the Johnson County school districts. So if the district is in Johnson County, they're invited to the table, along with all the legislators who represent those districts. So that includes all of our Johnson County legislators, plus some other legislators who also represent those districts who are out county. We invite invite board members, administrators, teachers, and other community members from those districts to attend. We meet here in the back of the boardroom. Everybody's welcome. We get a very healthy turnout of legislators, especially during the session. December's not always so heavy. I'm trying to get my commitments from them right now. Lots of times they come in without a lot to share because it's before the session. One thing I am going to be interested in hearing from them, and Brady brought it up earlier, the Republican caucus meets tomorrow. The word on the street is that they're going to have some conversation about vouchers. So actually just prior to our meeting tonight, I'm the legislative chair for the Grant Wood AEA Superintendent's Group, and I was working that group to contact their Republican legislators who will be at that caucus meeting tomorrow to talk to them about their thought process around vouchers, because we do know that that's got some traction right now, and so we want to make sure our voice is heard on that. So again, that's a monthly opportunity during the session. We start out listening to them. Tell us what they know about what's happening in Des Moines. Frequently, they've got questions for us about issues that are on their agenda there. And then it's an opportunity for us to ask them some questions at the end. We usually are pretty good about staying to an hour, so if you think about the commitment, it's about 4 o'clock till 5 o'clock. And again, we meet monthly during the session. We have it scheduled through April. I'm always cautiously optimistic that the legislative session will be done by April. If not, we usually add a session in May, and we've done it in June before when they haven't been able to conclude on time. So, and then I also noticed, jumping to the next session, just so you know, it appears that I posted the ISB material to the wrong item on the agenda. So when you go to that one, Janet, I'll refer back to this one when you're looking for content. So any questions I can answer for you on the legislative forum and the process that we use with our dialogue with them.
Doesn't look like it. Thank you, Steve, for that update. And so speaking of the next item, the ISB Day on the Hill, do you want to say a few words
Certainly.
about that?
We are a member of the Urban Education Network, and in the past, the UEN has had a separate Day on the Hill. And this year, the steering committee decided that they will not replicate that event. Lori will remember going to that in the past. And without the UEN Day on the Hill, I would suggest that you consider the opportunity to participate with the ISB Day on the Hill. It's a little bit more structured than our UEN Day on the Hill. May provide us a little less time with legislators than we had under the UEN format, but still I think a good opportunity for us to have a presence there in Des Moines, having conversations with those legislators. So you'll notice that's Tuesday, January 30th, 9 to 4:30. There's a link to the conference agenda on there, so you can take a look at it and see if that's something that fulfills your needs. And then if you're interested, please contact Kim and let her know. She can get you registered for that. I also had a nice long conversation with Margaret Buckton with the UEN, and told her that wasn't always sure that that date would work for everybody on the group. And she did offer that if that date doesn't work, she is happy to put together an individual Day on the Hill for us as the Iowa City Community School District. So no pressure to be there on the 30th. If it works, let us know. If not, then we can work to find an alternate date to get over to Des Moines and meet with our legislators.
It's fantastic. Thank you. Questions, comments? Thank you, Steve. Next up is the item on the new North Liberty Elementary School attendance area development process. And in our materials, there's a proposed timeline that the administration has provided, which kicks off in January. We had a work session on the need to do this, and we discussed it at our last board meeting as well. So Steve, do you want to give us an overview of the proposed timeline and process for this work?
Sure. So looking at that agenda, we wanted to have some adequate time after the break to advertise it to people affected. Looked at Thursday, January 18th as a potential first meeting. Those of you that have been through this before, that's where we have an opportunity to go through things like Appendix 5 and some of the other things that guide the board's decision-making in that process, get input from the community, and then we work internally with our software to draw potential maps and provide demographic data for the community. Go back to them. Potentially, we have up to 4 times, depending on how many iterations of maps might be needed, and then recognize the role of the board in going through that process in the open work session and board meeting format afterwards. Our goal was to try to create a format that gave parents in those attendance areas that are affected by this an answer as soon as possible, and yet still have enough deliberation time for the community members and the board to go through, recognizing that, as Allie said, if there's an interest in applying for a voluntary transfer to one of the schools, that may be more preferable to the parents, that they have adequate time to do so.
Steve, as I reviewed this list of dates, something I noticed is that the board isn't looking at the maps in a work session until after all of the community meetings. And I'm wondering if we could have a discussion at our first, if we could plan a work session following our first board meeting in January, which would be January 9th, to kind of have an overview discussion about boundaries in general, but this specifically as well, and looking at all of those 21 aspects of the Appendix 5, and as to kind of guide you guys so that you don't get all the way past
Sure.
3 iterations of maps, and then we say, wait a second.
Absolutely.
what
We
about
could
this?
actually look at some of those February dates too, and I'm sure that there's some opportunity there at board meetings to have some work sessions coupled with that so that there's a staggered process and we're going back and forth with there. Absolutely.
So should we plan on that January 9th?
Yeah.
A work session after the board meeting? Okay.
Comments or questions on the process, but then also the addition of this work session to sort of kick off the process. Any other thoughts or remarks from board members? Okay, hearing none. Thank you. We'll be kicking that off in the new year. Very timely and important, following up on the community comment earlier. We know we need to get after that attendance zone activity, and so thank you for putting the process together, Steve. Moving on to the teaching and learning area, we've got an item around school updates, Tier 1 schools, and listening post feedback.
Yeah, before I turn it over to Amy, maybe just some context, and I didn't think about this until we were starting to get materials ready for you, but the first attachment on there is actually that enrollment chart that we provided to you as a result of the update for the official certification date. And so just for context, maybe for the people that aren't familiar with it, when we talk about Tier 1, those are our schools that are identified as having the greatest opportunities for us and some of the greatest challenges for us. And in the past, we've had 6 schools that fell into that tier. After our certification date this year, we now have 8 schools that fall into that tier. In the past, we had 3 schools that were kind of in between in Tier 2, and one of those schools moved into Tier 3. And so we are really working now on Tier 1 and Tier 3 schools. So those Tier 1 schools are those schools that have some of the greatest challenges. And one of the things that's really important to keep in mind when we look at those was the role of the weighted resource allocation model in staffing, and the decision of the board through the superintendent directions to lower class sizes there. So just as a reminder, as you look at that, in kindergarten, our aspirational goal is class sizes no larger than 20. When you move into the intermediate, K through 2, when you move into the intermediate grades 3 through 6, our aspirational goal is class sizes no larger than 24. So I think it's important for you to keep that in mind because then the next document, which is posted there, shows all staff allocations throughout all of our elementary schools. And not surprisingly, you're going to see more staff, especially in our certified teaching column, in those Tier 1 schools because of the need that was identified in our weighted resource allocation staffing model for that. You'll also see that reflected in our paraprofessional staff. We use a RAM model for that staffing also. So just give you some context and some consideration as you look at how the schools stack up and how those allocations of staffing occur, is to remember that there is a specific differential between the Tier 1 and the Tier 3 schools, and very deliberate on our part as we go through that staffing process.
Steve, can I just ask one question on tiers? So I know we just have the 3 tiers, but my question is, has there ever been talk of going to maybe 4 tiers? I think, your Tier 1 up at the top of range from 78 to 51 is quite a great range to have all those considered the same.
We've had conversations internally. When the board went through that process, it was right on the heels of the repeal of the diversity policy. And at that point in time, there was a decision to look at the 3 tiers. I don't recall at that point in time discussion about having additional tiers.
One thing I've mentioned in the past is, as we look at that RAM policy, is that we don't have a definition of what high SES, I'm going to say FRL, because we all know what that means. We don't actually define in the policy what is high. So if we wanted to give a definition behind it, we could say X amount of percentage points above the district average for whatever category. instead of just having this kind of, that's higher than everyone else sort of definition. So that's something we could look at doing if we wanted to.
Amy, I'd ask if maybe you want to share just some feedback on the staffing form, and then we'd open it up to questions.
Yeah, so certainly looking through the feedback that was shared back with us, we saw lots of comments around staff members generating ideas around staffing. And so that's why we thought it was important for you to kind of see the lay of the land with what we provided. Just a couple of caveats here. We did not provide our specials FTE because we've got a lot of sharing going on across buildings. And we also did not include preschool teachers or paras in this. But the other thing that we did not include was some of our teacher leadership positions, which also flowed across the district. So there's a few caveats on this. Doesn't represent exactly all staff at the elementary level, but by and large, the majority. So I would entertain questions from the staffing sheet.
I've got just a question on the RAM. Are we using the exact same curriculum at all the elementary schools, including the RAM schools, as far as it's the exact same math or reading curriculum that is at any other elementary school?
So for the most part, yes. We do have some pilots going on in the district, and generally those pilots tend to land in our Title I schools. So right now we are piloting a comprehensive literacy program called Super Kids at the kindergarten through second grade level at Hills, Alexander, and Wood Elementary. Then other than that, some of our Title I buildings are doing some things more particular to a specific reading area. So, for example, phonics. Coralville Central has been piloting Jolly Phonics the last couple of years. We've got some other buildings seeing the progress that they're making that they've kind of jumped on. As Diane and I have been here the last few years, we know that if we continue to do things the same way, we're going to generally generate the same kind of results. And so that's why we've given a lot more freedom, where in the past, things have been fairly standardized. Go ahead, Phil.
No, right. But, if we're looking at the RAM model and trying to see if it's successful, if we're using a different curriculum than our other schools, are we, is it just the fact that there might be an easier curriculum than we have at our other schools, and then it looks like we're getting some success that way? Or,
yeah, good question. We certainly don't want an easier curriculum, right? We want to make sure that everybody has access to the grade level standards. So we're always on the hunt for really good, rigorous curriculums that are going to match those grade level standards. The reason we went to the pilot is we weren't seeing success with the HMH materials in those buildings, and we're also going to be entering into a literacy adoption here, not this next year, but the coming year. And so it allowed for us to also pilot in these areas to see if we were going to see some different gains, and I think that was smart to do some of that ahead of time.
Well, my concern is how are we going to measure success that way?
Sure.
That went with so many different variables in it. But thanks.
I'm wondering about and I see that the chart has changed since I looked at it earlier today. Now we have a category for short-term principal and short-term behavior analyst. What's the time frame on those?
Yeah, so we want to make sure that we're representing this as accurately and fairly as possible. So, and I'll just kind of back up a little bit. On September 22nd, there was a couple of directors, Laura Daly's here tonight, Director of Equity, Kingsley Botchway, and myself went out and met with Chris Gibson and a few of her staff members to talk about concerns that they were seeing in the building, and talked about what we could do potentially to help support that. So those two directors, as well as Diane, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, and myself, then each were out at the building at least one day for the next 4 weeks, kind of trying to help assess the situation. So then by October 23rd, we came back, Laura Daly and I, with a series of extra supports for Alexander, and that's what you see represented there. So that short-term principal FTE of the 0.40 actually equates to 13 full days were offered with additional administrative support between October 25th and then December 22nd. And the behavior analyst position was offered some increased FTE during that time as well. So that person in our district generally supports our 6 highest needs buildings. So you can see some FTE represented across 6 buildings there. She is actually an employee that works 0.8 time, and so she doesn't necessarily spend equal amounts of that 0.8 across those 6 buildings because she has also other responsibilities such as CPI training, challenging behavior team training. But we knew at that time it was time was going to be well spent by sending this person out to help support that behavior interventionist role. So really, she's closely tied back to supporting and consulting with those 6 behavior interventionist positions that you see in those 6 highest needs buildings. That's really where she focuses most of her efforts. With our 14 other buildings, she's more on call for some unique situations that we tend to not have as many behavior problems with. So we offered those supports over that period of time. This person was there through December 8th, although I know that she's been there this week again and is scheduled to be there, I think, twice this week and maybe one more time next week. And then it will revert more back after winter break to what she is typically allocated to that building. We feel like we've got more of the Tier 3 plans there under control. In addition to those 2 pieces, and we did offer an additional 6.5-hour para to help support the Tier 3 students. So when we went in to help support that work, there was roughly 17 students on a Tier 3 plan, so not in special education yet, but just needing a lot of support, and those plans really just needed to get put in place. And it takes a lot of time and effort and people power to get those plans in place, so we had an approach where the behavior interventionist and the behavior analyst that was spending more time there were targeting kind of the highest needs kids, and then we had an AEA staff member and an outside AEA staff member kind of start from the bottom up of those plans and to try to meet in the middle. And so I know that they've identified students that maybe could go back to Tier 2, identified students that were already on special education rosters, and so they've whittled that down. I think we're more around the number of 12 plans, 12 students needing those Tier 3 plans right now. But that 6.5-hour para is also there to help support, hopefully more so on the proactive side. So as you have a lot of these Tier 3 plans in place, you're wanting to provide a lot of positive acknowledgments, positive reinforcements. We hope that that's going on as that is built into the plan. Both the behavior interventionist as well as this para can help support that. Unfortunately, sometimes they're helping to support on the reactive side as well, so another person there to help with that. And then as far as technical assistance, you hear me talking about the kind of supports that we were given, but Director Daly, along with our behavior analyst, would go out and has been meeting weekly then with the principal as well as their behavior interventionist just for a weekly check-in. Chris and I have been most often talking or meeting face-to-face once a week. Sometimes it's been every other week. In addition to that, we've received technical assistance besides what I've already described from 2 AEA behavior coaches, both Tammy Beener and Teresa Greiter-Baker. And the initial request came from Chris around the Tier 1 side of PBIS to help do fidelity checks in the classrooms to make sure that PBIS was being implemented as we want it to be. And so that was a great thing that Chris did, and I know that they had spent hours in November doing that and then followed up with a meeting with that PBIS team at the end of November. So we were kind of attacking it from the Tier 3 side, from the Tier 1 side, and of course that then generated conversations about what was happening around Tier 2. So I feel like the building's in a much better spot than we were in September, and there's been a lot of assistance provided, great support provided. Chris and I had have had recent discussions around, as we plan to wean away some of these supports, we're going to be wanting to be real careful and monitor how things are going after winter break, and we'll continue to meet and talk about that so that we don't slide backwards.
That was exactly my question. I happened to attend the Alexander Post, and I'm really pleased to hear the different supports that we're putting into place, but then making sure that we have done enough once we come back after winter break. And so to hear that you're going to be monitoring with Chris, are we good? If there's any backsliding or change, I'm assuming we'll be responsive as we've been this fall to bring those supports back as the school needs.
Absolutely, yeah. And then as far as Twain, that was a building I wasn't hearing from. So for the listening post, it's just interesting to see what was coming out of there. And I kind of boiled it down to two pieces that we can help directly impact, and that's around just thoughts around space and then staffing again. So space, I think a couple of things have happened in the last couple of years for Twain. You know, we've certainly been implementing the RAM at a different level, which is creating the need for more classroom teachers there. This year, we've increased their classroom FTE by 2.0 with a second and third grade teacher each hired. It's kind of then displaced some people since we needed the support. So all Title I teachers, there's 2.75 FTE, and ELL teachers, 3.0, are working out of space that's been created in the library, thanks to Dwayne and his team for helping work on that. But we've had an additional hire recently, and so we were able to take a smaller temporary portable building that was sitting at Wood Elementary, and this has just been recently, it's there now. It sounds like they're working on maybe the wiring. Jeremy believes it will be done by winter break. And the other piece, besides the implementation of the RAM, is our students that are coming from shelters. So prior to last fall, students from the 3 shelters were going to different elementary buildings, and they all had to come back to Twain per what we heard from the DE. And given that, that wasn't unique to Twain, because I think that they experienced that situation in the past. But what has become unique is that instead of families being on a 90-day turnaround, they're now on a 45-day turnaround. And with that, then, that means that they can house more families and more students during the year, because that turnover is quicker. But with the McKinney-Venuto Act, we are asked or required to keep our homeless students in that same building. That's a perfect piece of the law. I mean, we don't want kiddos to have tons of transitions. So I was asking Jeremy, just in a quick conversation that we had today, you know, what has your number increased, and can you attribute it just even since the beginning of the year to the shelter? And he wasn't able to definitively tell me, but they've increased by 9 students just since the beginning of the year with that. So I think we have those 2 factors going on around space. And then as I look through the staffing pieces, you know, things that were being proposed by some of the staff members that night, the building substitutes, you know, that Jeremy had someone hired at the beginning of the year. He lost her to a full-time position, I think out of Marion Independent School District, took her for a full-time teaching position. But he does have one that's going to be hired here in January. She's actually been a reading practicum student in the building, so it's awesome. She's already had experience at Twain and is currently doing her student teaching in Australia. Doesn't sound like a bad gig. The counselor, I noticed on there, there was an ask to increase that person to full-time. They do have a counselor staffed at 0.8 FTE right now. And right now, that between Jeremy and the counselor's wishes, I think they're satisfied with that, continuing to stay at 0.8. Behavior interventionist, I don't think that there's a large need at this point to ask for additional support. You can see that that position is unique to our 6 highest needs buildings, and in speaking with Jeremy today, he feels like things are fairly well settled there too. But along with that, I think what's helping is that an additional special education teacher is being hired at 1.0, and this person will have a Strat 2 endorsement, which means that the majority of students on this caseload specifically have behavior goals. And so while maybe that BI might have been serving them before, this special education teacher will be able to do that. So with that, I'd entertain questions around Twain.
Well, and it's not specifically to Twain, but you were saying that homeless students they're funneled into Twain and
From the shelters, yeah.
from the shelters.
Yeah.
At the junior high and high school level, how does that work? Are they required to be funneled to a specific school like they are at the elementary level?
When we had that conversation with the Iowa Department of Ed, they were emphatic that regardless of where they are located, all students who are residing in any type of shelter situation are required to be students of the attendance area in which they physically reside, which is one of the reasons why we had to return the shelter students that we'd otherwise placed at other elementary schools back to Twain, because they're inside the Twain attendance area. So those students then matriculate up through Southeast Junior High and through City High right now, because that's the attendance zone of residence for them.
Okay.
I don't know that I have specific questions for Twain or Alexander. It's more kind of a high level. I know we did an exercise at the conference where they gave everybody a handout that listed FRL numbers 10 years ago and now, and said everybody look at where you're at, and every district there is doubled, right, or worse than that. And so as we're moving forward in time, I don't see that stopping. So as we're using, FRL numbers solely as a basis of, numbers of staff, it's not telling the whole picture. At some point, we can't do anything about it because it will get so bad. So I guess as a statement, or maybe the question is, what other things should we be looking at to help kind of differentiate those needs and how best we can, address those different populations? Because if FRL's just going to climb everywhere, that can't be the only thing we're looking at. One more thought. I just want to kind of put it out there again, that as we've moved forward from hearing from Alexander folks and the Twain folks, and we're hearing, lots of emails now from Northwest parents and listening to some folks there, that obviously there's a lot of immediate needs right now, but I think we really got to look at some long-term stuff. And one of the things that I took away from talking to the junior high level folks is that they find it very important looking at the elementary level and the programming there and the staffing there to really set a good foundation so that when they're coming to junior high, they're a little bit more ready, and then it's, that much easier for them to, address some of the issues that they're seeing. And, if they're not ready early enough, then it's that much harder for them. So I think as we sit up here and we talk about very immediate needs, it's very, very important, but we really got to look at those long-term things that are going to really affect change, because we can't sit there and slap half a person Band-Aids on things as they pop up. It's not going to be enough at some point.
I'll let Amy jump in, but just a quick point with the weighted resource allocation model. We actually have 14 different indicators. Just a couple of them that we use are things like stability and mobility. So we look at how often kids are moving in and out of a school. And then we also look at how many kids over the course of the year are in and out. So we look at that percentage, because you have some kids that might move in and out of the same attendance area a couple of times in a year. So we look at some things like that. English language learner students is another one. We're hoping, Laura's with us here, we're hoping that by next year we may be at a point where we have ELL programming in all of our schools. Prior to this, we had some schools that offered it, and so we were moving students from one attendance area to another in order to get those services. And one of the big challenges that our administrators shared with us, which is what prompted us to move ELL programming into all of the elementary schools, was we had a lot of kids denying services because they would prefer to stay in the home geographic attendance area rather than get on a bus and go to wherever the services were offered. Well, the problem with that was there were no services available to the students in those schools, and so some of those schools were really struggling if they had a lot of kids that denied service. So that was a really big factor for us as we went through and built that weighted resource allocation model when we first had that conversation. Now, since then, we've been pretty successful at adding ELL programs to the elementary buildings. We're universal at the high school level right now, so that opportunity in the junior high, so that opportunity is there for secondary students. So it's still a presence issue for us, but now at least we have a support issue. But that's another one of those factors that's included in there because we recognize some of the challenges that presents. So there are 14 different factors that we include in there. We can definitely get you a list of those.
Be great.
I was smiling a little bit when you were talking about FRL, Sean, because Steve had shared this morning that I think our district has grown since 1999 by 20% with our FRL rate, so it's quite significant. Mm-hmm. As I just quickly glance through the variety of categories we've got listed on that piece of paper there, certainly we've got impacts of the RAM that show up in couple of areas. I talked to maybe a couple of board meetings ago that some of the FTE in particular columns is maybe driven more just strictly by their enrollment. It kind of depends. I look at that Title I piece, and it's definitely driven by FRL status to begin with, and then the amount of kids that are non-proficient, thinking about how we want to staff there. So some things are dictated to us by Iowa code, and maybe we've got some flexibility because we're even staffing higher as I kind of peek through there. But definitely, I think we have to continue to think about ways that we want to think outside the box and provide services maybe in a different manner. Or think about where our needs lie now versus where they have in the past. One thing I think about when you talk about differentiating is I do feel like you see a ton of differentiation. If you just, kind of even go down the columns, your ELL columns, that typically is staffed about approximately one one teacher FTE to every 35 students. And so I do feel like we've differentiated, but I'd have to go and speak to almost every column as to what that looks like to get to that FTE. So, but I definitely think your point is well taken.
Steve, has there ever been a discussion of school psychologists in this district?
Actually, we do have school psychology services that are provided to us through the AEA. That's part of their service delivery model for us. So those are part of the asset base that we receive from the AEA.
And how are those, I guess, used? Do you have to, I mean, how does a school take advantage of that?
Amy, maybe you could add a little bit more to this, but that assignment, the aggregate assignment is determined by the AEA as part of their resource allocation model, and then we work with them to determine how we allocate those resources inside the district.
I would say in some shape or form, our buildings all have access to that role, but they're not necessarily always staffed, particularly in each building. You might have to, I don't know, float over to a different building and ask for that kind of support. So for sure, they're going to attach at least one staff member, whether that's a special education consultant, a school psych, a school social worker, speech language pathologist. That's kind of their key point person, and then if they need those services. So as we're moving through the child find process, absolutely you're going to see that child psych enter at some point.
Other comments or questions? I don't know, Matt, if you've got any remarks around Northwest. I know there's been a lot of community engagement emails, et cetera, regarding what's going on at Northwest, and I know we had members attend a listening post there, so if you've got any thoughts, feedback, next steps, that'd be great.
Sure. I think we'll be prepared at the next meeting to provide you a secondary document that looks very similar to the one Amy provided you. It gives you a breakdown of some of the dropout prevention services, administrator staffing, kind of a cross-section of all of our buildings that essentially shows how they're equipped and staffed in accordance with our different models of programs. I would say in reference to some of the teacher FTE, we've added about 3.0 FTE to Northwest staff this year. 2.0 of that, or 2.5 of that's been filled, and they're working to fill the other half with the science position. I believe they have some interviews even set up yet for tomorrow to do that. There's been a supervisory para that's been approved for them to hire, and I believe they're also actively working to fill that position to help with some hallway and lunchroom supervision. Around those, we've temporarily moved a dean of students that was shared between Southeast and Northwest to Northwest through the end of this calendar year, and then we'll kind of reevaluate as we look at that situation. Kind of like Amy said, I mean, I think there's that constant dialogue that we've had with that team and monitoring things so that we can check and see, okay, if we get things in a good place, then making sure that those things don't backslide as Janet had talked about. So those are a few quick pieces. If I look back to my sheet here, see if I missed anything else. Cameras was another one that we heard a lot of attention about. We've been we've received those cameras. We had some meetings here previously over the last month or two to have increased camera coverage at Northwest Junior High, and so we've got those in the district. And then we'll be meeting with Principal Cottrell to figure out where she'd like to have those cameras placed. There's been some specific requests communicated to us. We just want to confirm that, and then we can get the wiring up and have those installed and going relatively quickly too. So I really feel like a lot of those pieces can be quickly addressed and taken care of. It's just a matter of kind of following through and buttoning those some of those pieces up. There's some bigger things as far as Tier 1 PBIS training for the whole staff. So when you speak to longer term things, knowing that this kind of student demographic change with a higher low SES population, isn't necessarily going to change for us. What are those trainings that our staff needs in PBIS, in de-escalation techniques, some of those things. Those are all active professional development opportunities we'll be looking for our staffs to engage in as well. So those are a few quick things I'd say. I can provide, like I said, a more comprehensive summary to all of the secondary buildings next time. And like you said, you've seen my email traffic kind of coming back with that timeline of how those things have occurred too.
Questions, comments?
Well, I just have one. It's a kind of a Northwest building question. It's more directed toward Dwayne. There was an incident at Northwest where a fire extinguisher came off the wall. Aren't all our fire extinguishers in schools supposed to be in a cabinet or recessed?
I can take that one because I actually responded to that day. I think Dwayne ended up there too that afternoon, but we had some student misbehavior that day, and so it was knocked off.
And it was just, it had been brought to me by an instructor, and I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, so it was knocked off the wall. And usually when you use a fire extinguisher, only a little bit of it expels. Well, this extinguisher was dropped, and so the whole thing expelled into the hallway, which caused us the need to evacuate because students can't breathe that, and so we needed to get all of the students and adults out of the building that afternoon, and then we ended up keeping them out. It was a nice day, not a day like today with the cold out, so we were able to hold the students until release time and then let them go that day. But it did take some physical plant help to clean up and have that situation ready to go. You may have remembered conferences got bumped, and that was the event that caused conferences to get bumped that afternoon.
But my specific question is our fire extinguishers supposed to be inside a recessed or in a cabinet, or can they be just mounted on the wall?
And I'll answer that particular.
Okay.
Wherever we can, we do put them in cabinets. We
Okay.
try and recess them. In this particular instance, it's a concrete poured wall. It's attached by a bracket, but we're going to get a surface mounted cabinet and put it there. So there are a few exceptions, but most of them aren't. We do prefer to put them inside cabinets.
Right, and I just noticed walking back from the conference we had earlier that most of them in this building are in, but there's one right by the receptionist desk that's hanging on the wall.
The trick there is to see what the wall material is made
Sure.
of. Them.
No, and I understand, and a cabinet would definitely be a satisfactory substitute. Thank you.
I have a couple of things I just wanted to mention, and these were more long-term solutions that were discussed there at Northwest Junior High by the staff. But one thing they're really concerned about is that we are making a staffing plan right now for next year instead of having to play catch-up after school starts. So in a moment, if you can address that. They also have asked the board if we would consider using the weighted resource allocation model and applying that to our junior highs and potentially our high schools as well. So that's something we could look at if we wanted to look at that policy. And then they are asking for building subs, and I know that's not something we have in place at our secondary buildings, but again, put in a plug for that. They really could use that. They're really having a lot of trouble with their teachers having to give up their planning time to manage classes that are not filled by subs. And they even suggested that perhaps we should be providing some incentives to substitutes to potentially pick up least popular positions in least favorable locations or whatever, and on the hardest to fill days, like Fridays. So I don't know, if, again, maybe that's a larger discussion for another time, but if we could think more about those subs, because that does take a toll on the mental health of the teachers, and I am really concerned about the staff burnout going on in all of these buildings, but in particularly where they're having just no planning time and the same amount of students to manage, so, or more students, actually.
Sure, so I'll jump all the way back to your first point. So with the staffing planning, I guess I wouldn't necessarily agree with the assessment that we're planning for staffing now. I feel like we've been involved in that process since last spring. If you have tracked the email I sent with the timeline, and met with Assistant Principal Bruning as we saw those trends in enrollment changing and more students attending anticipated to attend Northwest, and that's when we added the initial 2.0 FTE, recognizing there'd be increased amount of students. Throughout the summer, we run enrollment reports and try to track that and engage that, and then work with the principals to communicate increased need if they see their class sizes getting to an uncomfortable, I guess, area when they do their master scheduling. So that's when we added, again, that additional 1.0 FTE in August to address those class sizes, and then we just haven't filled that position to that point. And so that's where I spoke to. They're doing the interviews for that yet tomorrow. There's been some things with teacher resignations and some of that too. So I do believe that staffing process has been in place since the spring. We've been constantly reviewing it, work to do that. And sometimes the teachers obviously, don't have that, granular data about when some of those things have been improved in that. But that master scheduling process happens for us in the spring. So that's something, we start taking course enrollment requests here in January. Principals build their master schedule. And then as enrollments change, that's where we really try to address those hot spots over the summer and do some things if we can. You guys are all aware of the funding challenge, but we still know, we have to serve the students, right? And we still have to do some of those things. So when we see those changes and it gets to an area where it's uncomfortable, our team, we grant the FTE, and then it's up to the building teams to post that position and get those filled.
And maybe to the subs, I know Brady's still here. We've been working really collaboratively with the ICEA over the last 2 or 3 years to think of new and innovative and there's no magic, but trying to figure out a way to do a better job, both attracting and then retaining subs. It's in the misery loves company category. I guess we're doing better than our peers. The fill rate in the AEA is about 80%. We're about 90%, but that still means that in any given day, 9 or 10 of our sub out of 100 are unfilled, and certainly we'd like to be at 100%. So we've worked with them everything from raising the pay rate, which was not necessarily super popular with some of our neighbors, which is probably why our fill rate's a little bit higher, but certainly very willing and open to explore other options that might create a higher fill rate for us moving forward.
Yeah, especially for the buildings that continually have unfilled spots. You know, if the district has 10 unfilled spots, but one of those spots every Friday is at one building, that takes a toll. The other thing I wanted to mention is you mentioned that the Dean of Students is being moved full-time just through the end of next week, essentially. When they come back from break, could there be an exploration of a different structure?
End of this school year.
Sorry, I said the end of the year, but I meant the end of the academic year. So the end of the school year. It'll be through the end of the school year.
Okay, great.
Yep.
I heard calendar year.
Can you clarify though?
So.
It was the person who was half-time at Northwest and Southeast, and she's moved over full-time. Is there somebody at Southeast then?
We worked with the Southeast team, and they felt that they were in a position to be successful the rest of the school year, that they would be able to, I guess, address any need they saw with the current staff they had. And so I'd worked with the Southeast team before I'd made that move to see if they were comfortable with that, and Emily and Michelle both felt like they were on top of things and could handle that. So we're moving Abby Haywood, our Dean of Students. She's been over there actually full-time already this week and there today. Jane and I have split time there here the last 2 days at Northwest, and we'll continue to do that through the end of the week as well. But so they'll be without a Dean of Students through the end of the year. We've only had a half-time allocation out to Northwest and Southeast, so Abby will just be there full-time here through the end of the academic year, and then we'll reevaluate.
Yeah, I was thinking calendar year, so I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
And we did offer Southeast. We know that things look good right now, but we did share with them that if as they move into the new calendar year, if they've got challenges and they need to fill that position, we can definitely make sure that we work on filling that for them.
And a shout out to Abby. I was very impressed with her work that she was doing there. She clearly had a very good connection to the students and really seemed to be able to do some preventative work if she was there. So I appreciate you making her full-time there.
One of the things that was brought up, you know, in regards to subs as we were at that listening post, just a random suggestion that somebody there made, was really looking at the College of Education and really letting them know what opportunities there are in our district for subs and paras and whatever else, and really tapping into that resource to make sure that, like, hey, you guys can do some of this stuff. You don't have to be, you know, already through school and all that stuff. And I don't know what all the rules are either, but really working with them to figure out, you know, maybe widen that pool a little bit.
Yeah, we've got a great connection with the College of Ed, and so certainly anything that we can do to make ourselves look a little bit more attractive to them and their students and get them in is a plus for us.
And we have been recruiting already with the class that is graduating this weekend, so those folks, we've encouraged them to get their materials in now so that we can do the background checks and have all those things ready to go, and then once their licenses are secured, then we can put them to work as soon as they're ready.
Yeah. Well, I think that Friday coverage is a problem, and some type of an incentive or something that way that has to be looked at to try and fill those gaps. Whether it's something that, you know, they get a incentive if they work 2 Fridays or 3 Fridays, that type of a thing in a row, that there's some kick in, but that's an issue.
Amy and Matt, thank you for providing updates, and we'll look forward to the secondary school update in January. Matt and Steve, thank you for your comments, and board members, your questions. If there's nothing else on this topic, we'll move on to the operational work and work on the comprehensive annual financial report for fiscal year ending June 30, 2017.
Our presenter tonight is going to be Heidi Habker, did I get that right? A partner with RSM that just completed our audit. Before Heidi starts, I would like to take the liberty to take a shout out to our local banks who presented earlier on their support. My shout out is today we received the funds on the bond proceeds that you approved at the last two board meetings. We received $61 million, $61.7 million today. All of that was placed locally with Hills and Midwest One as their based upon a bid process that we used with local vendors and some other statewide pools. But so again, it shows the support that we have locally for our district and our facilities plans. So I think I'd be remiss without recognizing them for their efforts in one more way. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heidi, who will go through the comprehensive annual financial report, also known as the audit in simplest terms.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me this evening. I do have a short presentation to summarize the larger documents that were put together as part of the audit. Let's see. So we'll go over some summarized financial performance information, the compliance reporting, and then auditor's communication. So first, starting with the revenue for all your governmental funds. This would include your general fund along with your Pebble and your SAVE funds. And as you can see, you had an increase of about $9.5 million in revenues in the current year. And those additional resources are coming out of the local tax categories and the state sources. The local tax was due to an increase of about $5.6 million in property taxes in the current year compared to the last year. And then your state sources are due to about a $3.8 million increase in state aid that you received from the state of Iowa. The other categories were pretty consistent with the prior year. Next, looking at the expenditures for the same governmental funds. For the most part, the categories stayed the same. You did see an increase of about $7.5 million. The majority of that increase came from the first two columns, the first one being the regular instruction, the second one being the special instruction. And most of that increase, which totaled about $7 million between both categories, had to do with salary increases. So additional staff planned because of contracts in place and negotiations, increases in salaries, and then also related benefits to those salaries. In addition, the operations and the administrative services also saw increases, but some of those increases were related to insurance premiums. So along with salaries, you had some insurance premium increases causing the overall increase in expenditures. The capital outlay, the second to last, kind of the greenish yellow, this year was about $58 million. That's related to the capital projects that you have, so those are shown as expenditures in this category. It was down from the last year, and that's just timing of all of your projects from year to year. This is a snapshot of your general fund and the fund balance or the equity that you have by category. There's 3 different categories that are reported. The first is non-spendable. These are dollars held in prepaids and inventory, so you can't convert them readily to cash. The next category is restricted, which is about $4 million, and that's that red bar. These are restricted by third parties, so you receive dollars in, and there's some sort of restriction placed on them, and you can only use them for certain types of expenditures, which are listed to the right in more detail. And then the blue bar is your unassigned, and that is the dollars that you're able to use for any purpose of the district. And then next we're going to look at the school nutrition fund. This is your enterprise fund, so it's reported a little bit differently than those governmental funds. This is looked at more at an operating and non-operating perspective. The very far right bar showing $228,522 is your change in net position. So essentially the net income of the year, which was up from last year. And that's a result of increased revenues due to a couple different factors. First, you were required to increase your meal price due to federal guidelines that you have to follow and charge a certain price. You also had an increase in student attendance and a higher portion of those students purchasing lunches. Expenditures remained about the same. There was a slight change there, and then your non-operating did increase slightly, and that would include things like your grant revenues. within this fund and interest. Next, I'll cover the compliance reporting. As part of the audit, we do a couple different things in the compliance area. The first one is we look at your financial statements under governmental auditing standards, and we look at the internal controls over those financial statements. In the current year, we did not report any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. So really nothing to report there. We looked at your checks and balances. As we audited, we found no errors that elevate it to this level either. As always, the state does require us to do some compliance testing, so that's within the CAFR also. And there was one instance of non-compliance, which was over the certified enrollment. This is very common. Every school district in the state has it. On October 1 of 2016, the state identified some differences in what was submitted for certified enrollment compared to what they had when they equal everyone out. So the district agreed to those differences. We send letters off. We talked to the district about verifying the documentation that they are in agreement with those differences. So this is a common one. You've had it in the past. It's one that will continue in the future. It's just a reconciling process, and the state requires us to report it as a finding. We also look at your federal programs. This is covered under the single audit. So this year we looked at two major programs, the Student Nutrition Cluster and the Title I program. We come in and under the guidelines of the single audit, we audit those programs in very specific detail. We sample the transactions, look at various requirements. Those programs did receive an unmodified or clean opinion in the current year, and there was no instances of non-compliance related to them, nor did we cite any deficiencies in that detailed reporting. And those two programs accounted for 72% of your federal dollars, so 72% of your federal expenditures were subject to testing. And this year you had about $7.95 million in federal expenditures in total. The last piece is the communication to the board. First, on your financial statements, you did receive an unmodified or clean opinion. So this tells you as the board that your financial statements are materially correct. There was a new accounting policy adopted in the current year. This was disclosure only. So for those of you that dig in the details, you'll see a new note. It's in regards to tax abatement. So just to talk briefly about that, because you might think, well, as a school district, we don't abate any taxes. But because your surrounding communities, mainly the municipalities, do abate taxes through urban renewals and TIF districts, it impacts your tax base and your assessed values. So ultimately, you do have an abatement through what they're doing in those districts. So that, what the disclosure shows is just those dollars that were forgone during the year related to those. The financial statements do have management judgments and estimates included, and as your auditors, we look at those that are significant to your financial statements. We perform our own testing, sometimes even calculate independent estimate, and through that process, all of them were reasonable and we had no concerns over them. We did have one audit adjustment that we found during the year. It was related to the Medicaid payable to the state. The district receives monies in related to Medicaid, and then they have to turn around and pay out a portion to the state. And there was just 1 month that was missed, that payback to the state wasn't done. When we caught it through the audit process, there was an adjustment posted within the financial statements as a payable, and then the district paid it in fiscal year 2018. There was also some uncorrected misstatement related to accounts payable. These are things that we find that management believes is not material, and we concur with that, so they'll correct it going forward. This was a little bit of an unusual situation. You paid a vendor for some modular buildings, and there was actually a lawsuit going along in the background that didn't impact the district, but it was who was to receive that payment from the vendor perspective. So they returned the monies to you, and when those monies were returned, they weren't reposted as an accounts payable. My understanding is just recently there was a settlement, and you now know who to pay properly, and those monies will be going out here shortly. So nothing related to what the district did, just an unusual situation, and when the monies came back in, they weren't booked as a payable. And then as you can see from the slide here, no disagreements with management through our process. We're not aware of any consultations with other accountants. We had no major issues that we discussed with management through the process, and we didn't encounter any difficulties in performing the audit in the current year. I'd like to thank you for your time tonight, and also thank Leslie and Craig and all of their staff and everyone throughout the district. We're very disruptive to their day. We add a lot of work to their day, so we appreciate all they do, and we couldn't deliver this without all of their assistance. And then I would just open it up for any questions that you may have of me of anything I covered or didn't cover.
I just have one question. How often is it that school districts are running in the black in their nutrition services?
It depends. Normally, you don't see that very much, and especially with those of you that were on the board last year, that you implemented, or 2 years ago, I guess, you implemented a new pension standard, which required you to put a liability on the books and in that fund, and that any of them that were slightly running in the black, that tipped them over to the red. So it is rare to see those in a positive position.
Yeah, that's great to see.
Other comments or questions from board members? I'd like to thank you for your report, and Leslie in particular, I'd like to thank you for your work putting this together. It's an impressive piece of work, the actual report itself, but also a clean audit. It gives us great confidence to see these kinds of reports come forward, so I know you spend a lot of time on this, so thank you for your efforts. Very much appreciated.
If I can just chime in, because I know we don't have a lot of collective experience on the board, so you're unaware of this. Leslie and I guess would be the district historians on this one, but when I came to the district, we regularly had audits with lots of findings in them, many of them year over year over year. And so we went through the process with our consultants at that time to help us understand which of those could be corrected structurally through reassignments of roles and adding the appropriate staff to the business office. And then they have worked very, very hard over the last 7 years. And we've been very, very fortunate that over the past 4 years, I believe now, we have had clean audits each of those years, and that's really a testament to the work that they do. And that first couple of years was a lot of heavy lifting, and it's really bearing fruit now.
Yeah, thank you. Very nice. Thank you so much. Appreciate the report.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to the modified supplemental amount application for dropout prevention.
We're going to tag team this one, Janet, if we can. The dropout prevention application is a process that actually, this is for the 18-19 school year already. It starts very early in the year. You know, we have to start about a third of the way through the current school year to put together our information on our staffing. And you heard some concerns and had discussion earlier tonight about some of the things that do impact dropout prevention in some ways, especially at the secondary risk factors. And so the team of Diane and Laura and Kate have been working hard on that to look ahead to next year to address some of those needs and see if dropout prevention funds can be used, because again, it's another one of those categorical funding that does have specific uses that can be funded through. So they've went through this process, tried to project the staff that they're going to have next year, made some reasonable assumption of what the cost of those staff would be for next year, and plug those into the formula that allocates how much of dropout prevention budget is. Dropout prevention is funded by 75% property taxes directly, and the other 25% comes from the district general fund to get the full $6.7 million, if I have the number correctly. So from a programming perspective, I'll turn it over to Diane and Laura, but that's kind of the application process and the financial piece of it.
Of course, we'll just take questions if you have any, but I think the document that was uploaded with the chart really shows that the majority of the FTE is allocated toward personnel. And then when Diane and myself and Kate Callahan, who's not here tonight but is a director of student services, began overseeing the dropout prevention budget at the beginning of last school year. We learned about the way that these the supports had been categorized, and they're categorized into 13 different categories. There's a brief explanation of each one under each heading, and the proposed and projected amount of FTE and the dollar amount that goes with that. And we some of the supports are specific to academics, some of them are specific to behavioral, social, or emotional supports. Some are specific to elementary, some are K-12, and that's noted in the information on the handout. And I think it might just be a good time to take questions if you have any questions specific to how it's laid out, since we've just got a little summary of each of the 13 areas that are currently in our budget.
Yeah, I just wondering that, so the certified staff salaries are going way down and other staff's going way up. So what's that? Am I reading that right?
Can you explain that a little bit more?
So certified staff salaries, line 1, are going way down. Is that right? FY18?
Do you mean with what's funded through dropout prevention?
Is that, so yeah, that's what I'm asking. So it looks to me like other staff salaries or other professional salaries, the FY17 expenditures, $805,000, and then the FY18 budget is $1.65 million. So I'm just wondering what am I reading that wrong?
Actually, if you want to look at the green, the last two columns, the green
Okay.
and the blue. So the green shows you the FY 2018, those salaries, and then the 19 is what's going to be projected for next year.
So remember, fiscal year 18 is the 17-18 school year. Fiscal year 19 is the 18-19 school year. Cool.
So it just looks to me like that's a big change between certified and other staff. Maybe I'm just reading that wrong.
I think you might be reading that wrong, JP, because if I look at it,
They're
we
both
went
going
from
up.
3.38 or 3.338 million to 3.563 million between the 2 years. If you look at the far two right-hand columns. So it is actually an increase projected for next year of.
So this is just where the budget increase, this is
Yeah.
why we're asking for this.
Yeah.
Okay.
But another way, sorry, I have my own microphone. Another way to answer that question, maybe qualitatively, is that we haven't made significant changes in the way that the certified or non-certified staff have been allocated from last year to what we're proposing for next year. Might be some slight differences, but just in terms of programming and personnel, that alone we weren't making significant adjustments with.
Okay.
Other comments, questions?
I really appreciated the pie chart there after I kind of asked a couple of my questions, really trying to get my head around how much dropout prevention is, elementary and secondary, and it's nice to see that that's all inclusive there, and really looking at, every one of those slices of pie is really important, and I wouldn't want to take one piece from another one's, and all I could think of as I sat there and looked at is that we need a bigger pie.
We could take a couple
And
pies.
I think that's really where we're struggling, but I do appreciate it in that visual. It really helped me understand how we're doing that, because as we sat there at listening posts, I mean, that's what I was thinking was, how can we use that piece of funding source to try and help look at some of those behavior problems at elementary, secondary, all those things. How do we keep all those kids in school? Not just the ones, as we've heard in emails and different things that, I mean, we're hearing of folks wanting to take their kids out to other districts because they're worried for their kids' safety and things like that, which is, not someone we would ordinarily think of as dropping out. And maybe they're not dropping out in the end, they'll continue school somewhere, but we want to keep them all here, right? So it's a big picture thing, and I just like how kind of put that together and clarified a little bit for me. So thank you.
Maybe one note on expanding that pie. For at least the last 6 years, the Urban Education Network has been working really hard, and actually got a hearing in the House last year to look at a per pupil allocation for students at risk. The state has a definition for those students that are at risk, and just like we fund special education, we fund English language learners, we've been pushing really hard for a per pupil allocation for students at risk. It's a universal issue. It's not an urban issue. It's not a rural issue. It's an everywhere issue. And some districts have more students in that category than others, and so we've been pushing really hard for that. We're hoping that that makes it back onto the stage this year when the legislature convenes.
Any other comments or questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve a resolution to authorize the Iowa City Community School District to submit a request to the School Budget Review Committee in the amount of $6,323,567. Did I get it right this time? For modified supplemental amount for the purpose of dropout prevention programs.
I'll second that.
Any further comments? Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you very much. We're up next for the annual grounds care report.
Thank you, President Godwin. Thanks for having us this evening. Gives us the opportunity to present this report. I want to introduce two individuals to you first who have a lot to do with what goes on in the background. You know, they don't always get the recognition they deserve. And the first one is one of our deputy directors, Jeff Barnes, who's sitting right behind the table here. And Jeff manages all the day-to-day activities with the crafts, all the small projects, pebble projects, and as well as the grounds crew. And he's a real worker. He's been with the district for quite a while. And we appreciate him. And the other gentleman to my right who's going to give you this quick little presentation is Ben Grimm. We hired Ben back in 2013 when we decided to move grounds back into our operations from outsourcing it to outside vendors. Most of you weren't here then. But it's been a real trip. And we've learned a lot. We've been through a lot of issues with integrated pest management. We've perfected that. And we've perfected how we take care of our grounds in addition to all the other things that they do. They do snow plowing, for example, and just so many tasks that Ben will just touch on with here in a few minutes. But Ben's done a great job, and it's been a pleasure having him here. So I'll turn it over to Ben, and I'll stick around in case you have any questions.
Good evening. I have just a couple of quick slides to just kind of give you an overview of the actual grounds department. Just a little bit of background. We have about 500 acres of ground space district-wide. That covers everything from parking lots to grass to forested areas, prairie areas, things of that nature. About 296 acres of that is actual mobile turf. Of that turf, we've dedicated about 190 acres where we will not use any sort of pesticides to try to be as environmentally friendly as possible and to protect the students. Trimming adds up to over 32 miles of actual trimming. We have about 16 miles of foundations around buildings and bleachers and things of that nature, and about 16 miles of actual fence line. So it's quite a bit of trimming. In that calculation, that's based off of trimming one side of the fence and not necessarily two. A lot of the fence, we actually have to trim both sides of that fence. Skipping down a little bit, our ornamental landscape, which is basically our gardens that are at the entrances and things of that nature, we have about 4 acres of that. To put that into perspective, the photo you see there is actually West High soccer field. It's about double that space filled with ornamental plants and stuff. So it's a pretty massive operation that we're dealing with. All right, so to manage that, what we really do is we break the grounds into various maintenance levels. We have an A level all the way down to a D level, and we try to dedicate certain areas to D, certain areas to C, and we don't try to maintain everything at the highest standard possible. And it's a way to allocate resources, make sure the resources are going towards the more important areas. We actually break the workload into routine versus projects. We try to dedicate or delegate the work to the temps to do the day-to-day routine stuff. mowing, trimming, pulling weeds, things of that nature. We try to keep our full-time guys working on more of the projects, the life cycles, things of that nature. Each year we try to follow a annual philosophy, and it's kind of determined by myself as well as the crew based on what's going on within the facilities master plan. If there's a lot of construction, we may be looking at aesthetics because we're trying to start up new schools. If there's no new buildings being opened, we may try to speed up efficiency, things of that nature. Our highest priority area is actually the athletic fields, which is A areas. We maintain those with the highest standard that we can with the resources that we have available. We're really looking to maintain that for safety and playability versus aesthetics, but the aesthetics does naturally climb as we're kind of doing what we're supposed to, trying to protect the athletes and improve the playability of the fields. Even with that, we've actually won 3 different awards since 2013, and those are based on not necessarily aesthetics, but more on managing effectively. So they look at the resources, it's peer reviewed, our peers look at that and vote on who actually gets the awards. The grounds does participate in a lot of the new projects that are going on, whether it's building or general grounds or athletics. So we have worked closely with the design teams as well as the implementation, the grow-in of the West High practice field, City High practice field, and then we're heavily involved in Liberty High as far as design, and we'll be very involved in the actual growing process of that. So that's kind of some of the things that our athletic field guy handles. Altogether, we have about 10 life cycles or initiatives that we manage within the grounds department. I'm only going to touch on a couple of them. The playground renovation is probably the most well-known one. We're really looking to update equipment while the equipment's at the end of its life cycle, 20-some years old. We look to renovate the fall zones to swap out the degrading material and try to bring in new material. And then we're also trying to improve ADA standards across all the playgrounds at the same time. Site amenities is something that most people won't actually see happening, but we're standardizing all the picnic tables, all the trash cans, all the benches. We're trying to build outdoor classrooms. We're trying to get bike racks that support the entire bike. And it's to try to create a life cycle of all those amenities district-wide. So there's quite a few of them once you start adding up all the schools. IPM projects are basically the newest initiative at this point. It's not really a life cycle of any sorts, but we're trying to put things like bike racks onto concrete, so we're not having to trim underneath there, we're not having to use chemicals underneath the bike racks. We're trying to put IPM buffers around the buildings, which discourage rodents and insects from penetrating the actual buildings. And we should see over the next couple of years, those items will actually continue to grow. With the new high school, we were actually able to implement most of those things during the design phase, and that's true of the North Liberty School as well. Some of the major projects that we completed in 2017, Shimmick, most people have heard of, but we also did playgrounds at Lemmy, Hoover East, Weber, Corville Central. We also grew in the practice softball field at Van Allen for Liberty High, and then we were involved in the grow-in of Liberty High plant material as well as Hoover East. 2018, we're going to see some of the same stuff, new playgrounds. They'll be submitted to administration and eventually to the board for approval. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll be involved in Liberty High athletics. We're currently working on the design stuff now, and we'll be involved in the grow-in later in the season. Longfellow is going to be a big project. I think that's probably going to be the most notable playground project because we basically have to rebuild the entire playground because the current location of the laydown area for construction is where the old playground existed, so we had to tear it all out. We're going to upgrade all that at that point. So, questions?
Yeah, I've got a lot. I know some of these could be handled in a operations committee, and I'll try not to keep it too long. But in the 190 acres of pest-free turf, how do you see expanding that to reach a goal of being zero pest usage in the future?
That's a difficult question. Right now, what we're trying to do is work within the IPM task force and kind of prioritize those steps moving forward. Right now, we're doing a lot of the documentation. As new schools come online, the elementary schools, for example, Hoover East next year will be included into that 190, so it'll grow naturally that way. And then, for the most part, we actually don't treat most of the grounds, but we don't necessarily dedicate it all to pesticide-free. So the only places that have really had any pesticide usage within the general turf since 2013, I think we've done the fronts of the high schools once or twice. The main lawns, we've treated it with a general herbicide, but 95% of the pesticides that are actually being used are actually on athletic fields, and that's going to be the biggest hurdle, is trying to reduce those down to zero. So far, we've been able to successfully get that down to 1 or 2 applications of herbicide a year, 1 or 2 applications of fungicide a year, and we're going to keep researching, try to find ways to do that either organically or naturally or whatever. So,
Right, and are we still have a policy of spraying tree rings?
Currently, we established them this summer. I think all of them got reestablished for the standalone trees, which was, the 3,500 or so. I'm sure we missed a handful of them. Once those are actually established and mulched, at most they should only need spot spraying periodically, which might be every couple of years. They might have to be refurbished. But the crews are actually working on tree rings right now, and we're working on trying to use the mulch that's produced from trimming trees. We chip it up, and we're trying to reuse that on site to keep those tree rings with the most amount of mulch to minimize weed growth.
Yeah, and do we, and this is just, where our athletics, of course, we consider level A, but I think if you really look at usage, for as much usage as, and people that are on Bates Field, and you look at a playground that gets used every day, every weekend, in the evenings, things like that. Just a comment there. Also, when I'm going through I appreciate the PowerPoint. When I'm going through the main report, there's a few things in here, and I'm just gonna go through here real quick, Ben. And one thing that you start off with your special areas, and you're referring to memorial trees and things like that, and this is just for food for thought. Maybe in the future we should be thinking about memorials that are non-living, like a bench or some type of a stone feature that when you have to cut down a memorial tree, and I know around Hoover there are several, and with whatever renovations we do, those memorials will either be, I don't know if we'll be able to transport or be lost, but that's just something to think going forward.
Absolutely.
One thing you might consider that we did at Coralville Central is when we had to cut down a tree, we made it into a bench, and we made it a memorial bench. So.
Yeah, right, right. And just one thing in general, going over the whole thing, and a lot of times you have it broke out by percentages, and I would really like to see it that we have actual cost. So we could, this last year would have been one of our least expensive snow years, maybe on record, just to be able to go back and look, okay, this year it cost us X, next year if we get a lot of snow, what it is, and so we can compare that way and track costs that way instead of by percentage. Absolutely. And also when you go by school, if you break it out by school, when Quality Care did it, you could go and you could look at the cost at each school. So if you had it as a cost to each building, then we could look and we can compare, well, are we spending more on the grounds at Wickham than we are at Hills for relative size? You follow where I'm going with that? And we can compare costs and that. And then also it's a way also to track the effectiveness of your IPM buffers, because if you have that cost per school, that then you can say, well, when you take out the bike racks and you put the trim barriers around the buildings, how that speeds up your work, and we should be recognizing an actual savings.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good suggestions there. As far as the cost per school, we currently don't track that. We actually track by cost per square foot because we're looking at an area and we're trying to maintain each area within that square footage cost or whatever. But there's definitely ways that we could look at trying to produce more information like you
If
mentioned.
you've got a cost per square foot per, and then you have your buildings, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
But I think it's, you know, I know there's a lot of man time around here because it seems like every time I come here, there's things going on.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's just because of the day of the week when I come. But you know, to be able to, I don't think it's, I don't know if you guys fill out a log for the day or that, or if you have a way of tracking how much time was spent at each job site, that type of a thing. So we could get a handle on that cost. And our equipment, talking with some other people in the industry and having worked for the vendor that used to do it before, there's a lot of cost in that equipment, and I'm just kind of concerned with that. And when I look at the pie graph for some of the staff, there were so many of them, I'm sorry, but there was one where 29, almost 30% of the time was spent in the shop.
Yeah.
Can you?
I might need to clarify that one. And I actually thought about clarifying it before I put it into the report because what it includes, it actually includes mobilization. So everything's remote, what we're doing. So we have to load the equipment that's going to be used on every particular site. And that percentage includes the morning meetings that we have with our temporary employees. So you can imagine, 10-minute meeting with 15 employees, it adds up really quickly. And then it counts for the travel time to the site as well as putting all the equipment into there. I didn't like that percentage actually when I saw that either, but once you start breaking it down and we can break it down farther, it makes a little bit more sense, but I didn't feel it was very clear in the report, so we can definitely break that down for next year.
You've got a handle on it and everything, but
absolutely.
When I'm looking at, I know there'd be a lot of elementary teachers that would be very happy to have 30% of their day devoted to prep.
Yes, exactly.
That way. But there again, what was I getting into here? On these costs, being able to break them out, to get a specific cost per mowing and a cost per snow, cost per fert, those type of things. We used to have those in those older reports, and it's a good way just to track how it goes forward that way.
Absolutely.
And also on your temporary, if we could break that out, I guess I didn't really see where that was broken out. Everything was lumped in as when the temporary and the full-time staff.
Sure.
I'd like to see that broken to where, we'd have temporary worker cost, our full-time worker cost, that type of a thing. And then we could also see fluctuations on, this last year we had a drought and we had very little snow. This should have been one of the cheapest years in record to do our grounds, and we should recognize savings. And if we have that to kind of look going forward in a year where we got a wet spring and the high temperatures and the grass just shoots up and you won't be, and you're going around trying to get ahead of it, those types of things.
Absolutely.
You will find a good description there about what temporary workers do, the type of chores that they have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Full-time.
Right, and since we are on playgrounds a little bit here and everything, we've asked for these life cycle costs, Dwayne. How close are, can you let us know on that, where we're at with that?
I actually handed them to the superintendent today, so he's reviewing them.
I should receive them
soon,
30 seconds later,
Yeah.
right?
Actually, after listening to Mr. Eastman this evening, I'm going to make one little modification on there to answer one of his questions, so you'll have it tomorrow, if Steve's ready with it.
Okay, excellent. And I know we got an email from Kingsley today about the Office of OCR. Was their inspection have anything to do with our playgrounds?
The inspection itself, sure, they went out and inspected a couple of the playgrounds. They did a technical review of the playgrounds. We actually had no part of that. They just went out there and did their thing.
Right, I understand.
So I think before the end of the school year, we should hear back from them. No?
No, actually. Yeah, before the end of the school year.
Yeah.
Not the end of the calendar year.
And could we just be informed on exactly when the district was contacted by the Office of OCR?
When we were contacted?
Yeah.
Oh, well, Kingsley could help me
Right,
with that.
right, and because I know that the inspection was on the 15th of November, we're the 12th of December. I feel that's something we should have been informed of as a group.
They actually changed the date on us 3 times.
A lot of email traffic.
Yeah, there's some email trains there, but
Right.
they did
But
change it several times before they actually.
I'm interested in the initial first contact that they were coming.
Any other further questions or comments on the grounds care report from other directors? Did you get through yours, Phil?
Yes, I did, thank you,
Yeah.
and like I preface, there is a lot of information in here, Ben and Dwayne, and I appreciate all the work you guys put into it and everything that way, and it's something that, with us on the operations committee, we can get deeper
Dig
in the
into.
weeds on it and things of that nature.
Jan, I have one quick question.
Please.
More for Dwayne. Liberty Fields, will those all be turf or artificial? What are we going?
The only field at Liberty that'll be turf will be the football field. Now, there is one proviso there. We do have a donor who's interested in paying for a turf field on the baseball field.
That's my next question.
But we're gonna wait until we get the bids, show him what the costs are, and then that person will decide whether or not they want to donate that.
And will the turf football field be able to be utilized for soccer as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So going, just because baseball was going to be my question, my follow-up question, that I know there's also been some discussions with individuals in the city of Iowa City about working together in the future on West High and Mercer Park Field to change those over to turf as well as in a partnership. Is that something that you guys have been contacted with yet?
I personally have not.
Okay.
Dr. Hansel may have, I'm not aware of that. Or one of the athletic directors, but it hasn't gotten back to me. But once we get the bids for Liberty, we're gonna have a pretty good handle on what those costs are.
Other comments, questions? Great presentation, Ben. Thank you so much. Learned a lot. Thank you for all you do. Moving on to summer facility use. There were no materials with this particular item that I saw.
No. So one of the things that we did was tried to take a kind of an environmental scan of where things are at. I'll share with you the material that I learned through that process. So right now, our summer school and our before and after school programs use various facilities throughout the district over the course of the summer. We do have several facilities that will be out of commission because of either, I think Ben used the term grow in, as we grow into Longfellow, and as we're looking at the transition from Lincoln and Mann as we go through the construction process there. Right now, one of the things that allows us to get all of our cleaning done over the course of the summer is we rotate staff in and out of the elementary schools so that our elementary staff collectively work as a team where they often work individually during the school year. And so there are frequently times where we have elementary schools that have no daily custodial coverage over the course of the summer while they're rotating through the other schools to do the deep clean. We also looked at our current facility rental requests, and almost all of our summer facility rental requests come in for the secondary schools. Those facilities are available for rental if the portion of the facility that people are interested in is not being cleaned at the time of the request. So Amy and Matt and Dwayne and I will try to answer any other questions you might have.
No, we've had interested community members come forward wanting to have like open gyms at the elementaries, things like that. So there's been no request for that.
There were no logged into the system, no, we did not. When we went through and looked at the rental requests, there weren't any in the system.
Okay, but there still is, I mean, just at this time. Now, I know that the city had a small program they were doing, but I think that was at Robert E. Lee.
Yeah, and certainly, we do, from that rental standpoint, we do try to keep those at the secondary level just because we don't necessarily have people at the elementary school over the course of the summer. And so if we were to have, if there was a need, if there was a desire to have an open gym, for instance, at the elementary school, then we'd have to work to get a staff member present where there may not otherwise be one there. Normally, our process for rentals are if there aren't staff on duty, then there's an additional cost to that. And so we really try to steer people towards the secondary schools because that cost is so much less expensive for them.
So even the ones that we have, the 28E agreements, there's a community, there's a district staff member there the whole time.
If there's a 28E agreement, that's often operated then by the facility or by the city itself and not the district. So we do have, our folks are on duty at those facilities, so think whether it's 2080 at Wood or a BASP program with Neighborhood Center of Johnson counties, that those come in through that 2080 process. There are staff members on duty for those.
Any other questions? Thank you for the update. Appreciate it very much. We'll move on to Appendix 9. Dwayne?
Thank you. Quite a few items here. I'll get through them as quick as I can. There's 12 projects with 14 approvals, and I have one update for you. And I'm going to take them a little out of order, and you'll understand later. First one is transitional housing. It's step 9, substantial completion, and step 10, project acceptance, which does two things. It accepts the project as being totally complete. All the punch list items are done. And that we then finally release the retainage, which in this case is $24,715. And it lists a little description to help the new board members. Substantial completion doesn't mean that every little item's done, but that the project's substantially completed, that we as a district then start to occupy the building or use the building or start to move in or whatever it may be or whatever case it may be, but there's still ongoing punch list items. Once those punch list items are, and that is a requirement by state law that we declare the project substantially complete, and that dictates the ability to release retainage. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, depending on the amount of work. We're also obliged to keep back twice the dollar value of the remaining work. So if there's a punch list item that we see is going to cost $50,000 to complete, we're obliged to hold back $100,000 until that item is completed. Once the architects have certified to us that the project has been, all the project punch list items have been completed, then we'll accept the project, and basically that establishes a warranty date. So that's why we do that. So you're going to see a lot of those as the projects finish up. We may not get all the way to 10. We may do 9 and 10 at the same time just because they finished the project, and it's just coincidental. At Shimmick, we have a step 8 change request for $12,647, and we did some additional concrete work around the playground, and we removed some of the old asphalt, and we did increase the quantity of the engineered wood fiber that was used there. At Hoover East, kitchen equipment, typically we do separate contacts for the kitchen equipment at the new buildings. This is a step 9 substantial completion and step 10 project acceptance, and would release the retainage of $4,517. At Lucas Elementary, step 9 substantial completion, not quite ready for project acceptance yet. There's a few little bugs they're working on even today to get it resolved. So the retainage there is $216,691, and I'll have to determine this week how much of that we should release. At Mann Elementary, it's a step 2 professional services contract. And what we did on Mann Elementary, and we have a couple other projects, is we've been doing the civil engineering contract separately, and that's so that we can deal with the city and the Iowa DOT on the bus drop-off. We have to deal with different entities. Plus, we have to deal with the Parks Department on the layout of the playground equipment at Mann. So this is a separate contract to do this work that was not included in the scope of the architect. And that contract is for $38,500. The next one is roof management program bid package 1, and it's a step 8 change request for $31,951. And this is for unforeseen work associated with the roof over the old gymnasium. And some of you have heard me talk about it, but we have a project planned for this summer. We have some structural issues with the old steel frame above the gym, and with the walls around that gym up high. And so we had to do some additional work to cover that up, to protect it, to get through the winter, and that work will be done next spring, or next summer. Christine Grant Elementary, again, is a step 2 professional services contract for designing North Bend Road. So we typically design the roadways, we've done them at Alexander and other places where we have to design the actual street, build it, pay for it. So this contract is to design North Bend Road, and that again is MS Consultants for $53,700. Then in your packet tonight, you'll see quite a few documents for the design development of Mahan Elementary. You'll see some more detailed floor plans, some elevations, some colored drawings. You'll even see a site plan attached in your information. And that's that mid-step. We did the schematics early on, now we're doing design development, showing you how it's progressing, certainly not final, and then we'll eventually get to construction documents that go out for bid. And I would say at this point that the actual hard construction budget for for Grant Elementary is $16,105,000 some dollars.
What was that again, Twain?
The hard construction dollar budget is $16,105,463.
Okay.
The overall budget, which includes design cost and testing fees and permits and all those kind of things, is $18,983,616. That's the dollar number that you saw in the facility master plan. I got the estimate yesterday. I was quite pleased with it. It has everything but the road, and it came in at $15,047,000. So it's $1 million under, but that road's going to cost $1 million. So we're right on target. I'm very pleased with the outcome, and that is an estimate that we get from a professional estimator on all our projects. We actually pay for that so that we get an independent review with current costs, and it helps us stay on budget and stay on track. So I'm very pleased with that. West High School Phase 1 is a step change request for $28,668, and we requested that, and try not to make it too technical, but an admixture, it's an ingredient that's put into concrete that prevents moisture from moving from the ground into the space. We do that a lot underneath gym floors, particularly when they're wood. We also put a hard plastic vapor barrier, but we found that if we add this mixture to it, that we get quicker results, it dries faster, and we're able to put down wood floors because you have to have a certain moisture content to lay that wood on top of concrete. This helps us get there quicker. So it's a pretty good investment. They also warranty the concrete that way and any moisture damage to our floors. So I see it as a pretty good insurance policy and a way to get jobs done faster. We also had some unforeseen circumstances with electrical conduit and utilities when we started digging up around the site there. And I don't know if you've been out there yet, but it's looking pretty good. But it was a mess getting there. I mean, there's wires and conduits and pipes and you name it going everywhere out there. The next 4 items, I wanted to give you a little precursor to that. These are recommendations for the architectural firms to design the next 4 projects. And those 4 projects are the result of your accelerated master plan. So what I want you to know is that we have 17 pre-qualified architectural firms in our pool. And we have probably another 6 or 7 engineering firms, and then we have some testing firms and things like that. We've taken the time to pre-qualify them all based on their experience, based on their references, based on just experiences, frankly, that I've had with them. And so we've gone through that. We sent out an RFP to all 17 firms. Not all of them responded. Not all of them responded to every one, but you'll see in a minute that quite a few of them did for each project. They kind of pick the projects that they're interested in, they respond to them. What you need to know too is that we evaluate them, we look at their fee, we look at their design process, how they contain cost, how they administer the construction, their engineering and their consultants. We give them local preference. We look at their relevant projects and their references. And I gave the top 4 or 5 for each project to the school principals and had them and their staff review it and give me their recommendations. So they had input into the process as well. So having said that, at North Central, Step 2 award design contract, we're recommending SVPA out of West Des Moines. They did Liberty High School. We got 12 responses, and those responses ranged from 6.2% to 7.81%. SVPA was at 6.21. And that fee amounts to $560,052, and the budget for that project is $11,103,176. At Southeast Junior High, their addition renovation, we're awarding step 2 award design contract. We're recommending Design Alliance of Waukee. They did Coralville Central and doing currently Lincoln Elementary. We got 10 responses for that project. The fees ranged from 6% to 7.58. Design Alliance was at 6.75, and their fee is $854,535 on a budget of $15,586,059. At Tate High School, again, a step 2 award design contract to Rohrbach and Associates of Iowa City. We got 9 responses. They ranged from 6.92% to 8.25. Rohrbach, if you may recall, was in a joint venture with BCDM out of Omaha, and they're doing the Longfellow and Mahan projects. Will Downey is the principal at Rohrbach. They decided to submit a proposal on their own merit. It was a good one. They came in at 7%, $200,609. The budget for that project is $3,528,271. So those are the recommended approvals. The last one is an update for City High Phase 2. We got 9 responses. They range from 5.95% to 8.4%. We're going to do interviews there with 4 firms later this week. That interview team is made up of staff, students, school administrators, district administrators, and we even have some community members on that committee. So we're looking forward to that. It's an important project that it's going to be very visible to the community. We want to make sure we get the right architectural team that not only can do the professional work, but can then deal with the community as well and make sure that those meetings get handled properly. So we'll have a recommendation for you on January 9th for the City High project. With that, I will answer any questions you might have.
Well, earlier, we had Charlie Eastham bring up some opportunities we might have for playground surfaces. Could you comment on those?
Sure. Typically, as you heard Ben mention, we're doing Longfellow this summer. So we don't typically do the playground. We do the playground layout or the area that it's going to be in, but we don't get into the details till the second year of the project or the last summer before they move in because there's so much going on out there. So we won't be planning Grant. We won't be planning the one at Mann. We won't be, and a couple of the other ones until we actually get into the second summer of the project. So they're coming up. And the other reason for doing that, Phil, is that we're going to know how much we spent on the construction. We're going to know how many dollars we have left in our contingency, how many dollars we have available to do the project. Frankly, I would absolutely have no problem doing rubber surfaces, but you need to know that they can cost 2 to 3 times what we've been doing. So we need to take a close look at that. Certainly will. And when you get your life cycle report, that's based on a 20-year maintenance plan on those projects. I'm going to go back tomorrow and put in what the actual construction cost is in there, but it's built into the overall plan. So I'm going to identify what the construction would be just for those surfaces, so you'll have a pretty good idea what those cost.
Right, and at an equity committee meeting, they had a playgrounds expert talking about, you definitely want to put a concrete surface down first and that. So I hope when you're pricing that, it's not, I don't know why I would even put this in that you would choose a lesser cost option.
I'd love to hand it to you, but I absolutely did that.
Okay, very good.
And just a point of clarification, though, the rubber tile playgrounds require a concrete subsurface, okay? Poured rubber does not. It requires a compacted base of a different material. So based on what is recommended is what you'll see in that life cycle cost, okay?
Very good. And the firm that's doing Tate, you said they were in on Longfellow as well?
Yes, Longfellow
the design
yes.
firm. Mm-hmm. And when you do this pre-selection, can you? I know you've talked about this before, but I mean exactly what. Do you have a metric that you're using in your pre-selection? Who all's making the decision when we get down to that point?
Well, first of all, I read them all, and I evaluate them based on that criteria that I gave you before. And we do have a metric, and we award points from 1 to 4, 1 being best, 4 being poor, you know. However, most of the architects always fall into the 1 to 2 range because they know what we want and what we're established here is the practical part of it, that proposal. Then we rank them that way, and then we look at the fees. We add in all the reimbursable costs, you know, the testing, all that kind of thing, the blueprinting, and then we evaluate the fees based on the overall budget. We rank them that way. We add all those points up and rank them from 1 to 10 or 1 to 12, depending on how many firms proposed. I review them with Dr. Hansel. Then we recommend the top 4 or 5 firms to the principals, and we let the principals and their staff decide which ones they would prefer, and they actually read the proposals themselves. They don't go through the metrics or the ranking of them by category like I do, but what I do ask them to do is to look at all the relevant projects. Most of those architects have toured their buildings, so they've gotten to meet them. They've got some sense of who they'd like to have on their building and the projects they've done in the past. So I actually took the first recommendation of all 4 principals and presented them to you tonight.
So that's something you haven't done in the past?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've been doing it for years, yeah.
Could you remind me when you said the playground decision would come up for man?
We'll design it, we'll get the design work so that we can perform it during the second summer of construction. In other words, if we start a building in 18 next spring, that won't be done till the fall of 19. So the summer of 19 is when we would do that playground. And we'll design it probably starting in January of 19 and be ready for that summer.
So that's when you would be coming to us, and we could at that point.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll know what our budget is, or how much of the contingency we've spent. You know, we'll have a pretty good idea of what dollars are remaining in that budget.
And I assume similar timeline for grant as well? Well, yeah.
For grant, yes.
Because grant would be open in 2019, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
All the projects I brought to you tonight are scheduled to be completed in the fall of 19.
Okay, I asked a question and got an answer ahead of this, and I'm still trying to just make sure that I've got it all correctly, because we've been asked by lots of people to really pay attention to the buildings that are going up and what's really going in them, what they're going to look like when they're all said and done. And I'm kind of grasping the concept of you kind of get this, the first phase is this very general kind of picturesque version of what the school will look like, and then as we move on, the next step is here's a little box, this is a room, and and maybe it says that it's a first grade classroom or something like that. And right. I guess the 2 points where I'm trying to figure out where it aligns in the process, one, in the answer that I got was, you kind of give the architects a template with detailing the number of rooms and things like that. So there's room for input at that point as to what that template should be for the sheer number of rooms. But then I guess what most people have been asking us about is, what does that room look like on the inside? What's it used for? What kind of things are going in there? And is that well after this process? The Appendix 9 process? I mean, is it once the construction's done, now it's up to the staff to figure that out, or where's that lie?
No, backing up just a little bit, that template is a thing we've talked about for the last couple of years, but it's a guideline for new buildings based on experience that architects and engineers and school administrators have had for the last 18 years. Okay, so it's a document that gets updated quite frequently as to what is standard in the industry. So, having said that, we hand that to the architects, and they then start to develop a schematic design of the number of classrooms you need and the number of resource rooms you need and special ed rooms, that type of thing, the size of the gym, the size of the cafeteria, the size of the nurse's office. All those things are in that template. And it's just a place to start. But once the architects do that, we sit down with the committee of typically a cross-section of the building, staff, administrators, and we invite students. And we'll sit down and talk about those spaces. Does this work for your building? In the case of Grant Elementary, we don't have a constituency there, so we invited the principals from Penn, Garner, and Van Allen. they invited one staff member from each building, and we had one community member from each building sit down and review those plans and talk about how those rooms are used. Are they big enough? Then when we get a little further in the process, we do the design development, which is really the beginnings of the hard document, and you can see where the rooms are. Now, we'll go back to the staff, or in this case, the group we had, and start picking colors and finishes and tiles and talking about how the room's going to be used. Typically, what I ask architects to do is make rooms as flexible as possible because they change over time, particularly resource rooms and special ed rooms. So staff gets some pretty serious input into that. Good example, Liberty High School. You know, we didn't have a constituency there. We kind of built it over time, but we started by pulling the science teacher from West and the band teacher from East or City and pulling people in, and they helped us develop all those plans. We had our special ed folks involved in that suite that's up there. So we get a lot of input from a lot of staff as to what's current practice or best practice in the industry. So it kind of, maybe morph isn't the right word, but you start with a basic plan and then it develops into the best plan. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just trying to, we're asked to provide more and more oversight from, the community members, and I'm just trying to figure out at what point do I actually have oversight there? Because I feel like that work is done and then it's presented.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to ask my advice, you need to listen to your staff. You need to listen to those folks because they do it every day and they give us some pretty good
Yeah, I absolutely want to know, and that gives me understanding that you're meeting with those folks and they're providing that input into it. I know that's what happened with Liberty and the special education suite that they have, and it's pretty phenomenal because they got to have some input there. And I just want to make sure that we're not dropping the ball because we're not paying attention, but I really wanted to get my head wrapped around the entire process.
The other thing that happens is that I ask the architectural firms to go out and do a program assessment. If it's a current building, okay, I mean, if it's an addition to City High, for example, they're going to have to go through and assess all the programs and figure out where they're at, if they're the appropriate spaces, and the reason I ask them to do that, because quite often I've seen over the years where we can flip spaces. Maybe the office needs to be somewhere else. That's a wild example, or something needs to be in that office space. So you can start flipping spaces to make them more appropriate for the needs and the uses that are going on in the building. So they do that program analysis for us. At Liberty High, they did their own program analysis in addition to the template after talking to the staff folks. They also visited West, they visited City and looked at their programs, so they kind of collected information from a lot of different places. It's a pretty thorough process. In terms of your review, always willing to show you as much as you want to see or as little as you want to see. You have oversight responsibility. Does it meet the budget? Are you confident that it does? Is this the right way to use taxpayers' money? And you have that responsibility. So it's a big decision.
I appreciate the word flexibility in the design because I think that really is key. That we, as needs change, the uses of those rooms are going to change, and they need to be able to do that easily. I was just going to one last comment based on the playground conversation. I'm a little concerned with hearing that we're going to see how much money's left and then we're going to figure out the playground. That's a little scary to me to think that, well, we got $10 left, so.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, obviously, we've went through the whole bond and everything. We've got finite pots of money for everything. Within that scope, we need to look at, but any future stuff, I think we need to be a little more proactive in really baking that into the budget ahead of time and not see what we have left.
Yeah, I want to echo that. That was the comment that I wanted to make too, that I don't want to get to the end and decide if we have money or not and then put in a rubberized playground. If we're intentional about our desire to provide that kind of play structure or play environment, we should assume we're going to do that when we've got new buildings going in or major renovations. And we as a district need to commit to that and make sure that our budget is appropriately covering those expenses.
Let me clarify. I should have said this. We have provided for these playgrounds in our in our Pebble life cycle for playground and athletic fields for the last 3 years. We've been doing them. Nobody's gone without a playground. Alexander, Carville Central, Penn, they've all gotten new playgrounds. And we've done that through Pebble life cycle. And if we have some additional funds left in the contingency, we can make it maybe a little better. Now you're asking to go to a different level.
Yeah.
So we've been able to provide the basic playgrounds for these schools without exception. We've been able to do it. And in addition to that, some of the other older playgrounds that need to be replaced, i.e. Shimmick, okay? What I'm saying to you is if you want to go from 150,000 to 400,000, we need to really figure out where those funds are coming from. But we've been able to produce the basic playground structures prior to us putting this playground life cycle in place. PTOs had to raise the money for their playgrounds. We said there's a lot of inequity in that. 3 years ago, maybe 4, Wood Elementary could only raise $1,500, and Wickham Elementary raised $100,000. Where's the equity in that? So we implemented that policy, put it in place so that there's a little more equity across the board between schools. We have the money for the basic playgrounds. What I'm saying to you is if we go to that next level, we need to figure out if it's going to come from Pebble or if it's going to come from the construction budget. That was what I meant to say to you.
But I think you're right on, and I think the work lands on us to a certain degree more so than you, that I think we do want to look at what's going to take to get to that next level, because I think it is something that we're all very interested in doing. And so I think that work is ahead of us, that we really want to look at that, and I think we're going to.
Yeah, it's us to make a priority of it, and like you say, find the revenue streams, and that we have 40 AP courses, and the state doesn't require us to have any. So if we make it a priority, we get those things going.
And we know grant is 3.9 under budget, so there should be funding there for us to plan for that now.
Oh, it's not 3.9. It's right now 1 million on the construction budget. The 18 million.
No, the estimate is under budget, you said.
Yeah, the construction budget for grant is 16.1 million. The estimate came in at 15. So there's only $1 million spread there.
Okay, still, though.
But we still have to put the road in there.
Maybe another way to look at this is when Dwayne brought that draft to me of the various options that we have for playgrounds, my suggestion is then we take a look at that and decide what is our standard of care across the district. And then once we figured out what the standard of care is, then we can say, given the revenue streams we have available right now, what would that do to the life cycle fund? And given our expectations for replenishment, is that cycle too long? And if so, then do we need to identify another revenue source so we can compact that? And part of that's a decision by the board from a prioritization standpoint and how fast they want to move that forward. But I think once we develop a standard of care, then there's the opportunity from a systemic standpoint for us to put it into the life cycle process and then begin both working with our new playgrounds and then working with those that are being refurbished, so that as we go through that process, and as you were saying, Sean, as we go through that next round, that we've got a standard of care that's uniform across the district. And so regardless of where you're at in the process, you know that when your playground's up, this is what you're going to get.
Maybe that's something the Operations Committee can tackle and come back to
Right,
the
well,
board and bring a
in
recommendation.
Kingsley's thing too, he alluded to a committee on playground surfaces, so I think there's going to be some work on that, work to bring that forward, and I'm glad we finally got those life cycle cost things. One last thing, Dwayne, on our designs that we're getting, if we're paying for any designs, I sure hope that they're brought to the board and we get to see all, maybe not the most, not just the one that is selected, but anything that we're paying for. You follow me?
Yeah, we don't actually, you mean in the proposal process?
Right.
Yeah, they don't submit designs in the proposal process.
Well, when we had the North Elementary, what was presented, you said, well, there were other designs.
Well, that might have been a poor choice of words. There's other proposals. Most of these projects that I brought tonight had 8, 9, or 12 proposals. Those are proposals for design services in which they'd identify that, we know what we're doing, but none of them had a design presented to us.
Okay.
That's done after we hire them.
Right, but when it gets to the point where the staff is choosing through.
You want to see the various schematic designs is what you're asking me.
Yes, right.
And we'll we'll do a better job of showing you the 2 or 3 that were preferred.
Okay.
Because sometimes we have 8, 9, 10.
No, well, but as far as I'm concerned, if we're paying for it.
Fine, yeah.
And we get 3 copies of everything, right, from those guys?
3 hard copies?
Yes.
Well, I get electronic, I can make as many as you want, I guess.
Oh, perfect, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, just so they're available for the board to view. That's all I'm looking at.
Dwayne, I have another question. So we're running 2 music rooms in several of our larger buildings, with Grant
Right.
Elementary being a 600-student building. I see we don't have that built in. You've heard me say this before.
I know, yeah. And Amy and I need to have that discussion with the music coordinator and see how that's shaken out, if they truly need a second room. I'm open to it if that's what we need, but I think we need to have that discussion with the education side of the house first.
So what we're approving tonight isn't
One music
beyond
room.
that, we still have time that you can
We still
make
have
that
time.
conversion?
Yes, we do.
Further questions?
Thank you. I move that we approve the Appendix 9 requests as presented.
Second.
The comments? Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. Oh, yay, did you say? I'm sorry. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eystone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to the items removed from consent agenda. We've got,
Item 6 and 7? Right. Item 6, I was just wondering if we could get a little more explanation on that, the insurance plan addendum.
Leslie or Paul, you are on the insurance committee. Could you provide just a quick update?
Every year, we take a look at the plan in terms of a renewal that is done. It'll start in January. Our plan actually renews on April 1st. And we start that process. We look at claims processing. We look at industry norms for all of the factors and the coverages that we have within our plan. We've looked at our plan. It is until 2016, we had not changed our copays and deductibles in the 20 years that I've been here. And so those, as you know, are inadequate to sustain the plan as it is. And so we've looked at those plan design changes. We systematically went through those. The first year in 2016, we were still on grandfathered status, which is an Affordable Care Act designation. We were only limited to the changes that were within an indexing based upon medical inflation at that point in time. It was a complicated formula. So we made the changes that we could make at that time in plan design. We've made the decision that it's no longer prudent to stay on that grandfathered status. The only thing that really drives that for us is that you have to require some experimental procedures. But we have all of the other things in terms of well checks and preventive medicine and everything, the basics that are required in a plan under Affordable Care Act. And so we've decided that it's no longer prudent to stay on the grandfathered status. By doing that, we can move and implement these plan design changes. We absolutely understand that it impacts the lives of every one of our staff members that's on our health insurance plan and their families. But the other side of that is it needs to be somewhat user-driven. And so when you have an employee or their family using the emergency room 21 times in a year, that becomes very costly. I'm not saying you don't go to the emergency room, but the fact is the emergency room should not be your primary care physician, and that's what it looks like. So that's what we're trying to do is to provide some steerage, is the word, that steers people to make good decisions regarding their personal health care, and these are just part of that process.
Okay, thank you.
And these are all things that everybody was represented on this committee, so they've all agreed upon
Yeah.
it.
Super.
Leslie, how much is in our insurance fund?
I think we're right about $14 million right now.
So this is one thing I have a little historical context on. There was a point in time when we were borrowing money from our general fund because we had no money in our insurance fund.
Right.
And so now we're sitting on 14 million, and I know, having been on that committee for a long time, Tim Kearns gives great advice. And I think he's doing right. And Paul, you're right. That committee is a model, I think, of how we want our committees to look, of the amount of input, the amount of conversation, and not, you deliberate and you come out with something that everybody agrees to. So it's just really something I think that we should be proud of as a district in the way that we handle our self-funded insurance plan, and it's done really well.
Yep. Thanks, JP. And just for the board members' comfort level, that insurance committee meets once a month on the first Monday of each month during the school year. So it's an ongoing, regular meeting. It's not ad hoc or at-will type of thing. It's a regular, systematic approach. We get monthly updates of where we're at from a financial perspective on the plan. And as JP noted, we did have to borrow from the general fund, I believe in 2003, I think. Is that pretty close to the ballpark? And so since then, we've been able to develop that. We've been fortunate to have some positive claim experience years as well that have helped us, quite frankly, so knock on wood on that as we move forward. But any good self-funded plan should have at least one half year of claims as a reserve balance. So we run about $16 million of claims in ours. So at a minimum, we should have $8 million in our fund balance. We're a little bit above that right now. We recognize that, and so we have used some of that fund balance to control premiums for the last 3 years consecutively as well. So, we are managing it from that perspective as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, I move we approve item 6, health insurance amendment.
Second.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Yes, and on 7, Dwayne, on this one, it was determined, so you didn't receive any other bids on this project?
This again is for professional design services, and we did not request any other fees, proposals. And the reason is that this is an ongoing Pebble life cycle project, and this company, MMS, has been doing it for 10 years. We've had good success with them. They design the projects we ask them. We pretty much control those projects in-house. We didn't see a need for that. They're a local company who's done a pretty good job for 10 years.
Well, I just noticed it was 2% higher than the year before, even though it's a smaller contract, but that's,
Typically, when you do less, your fees will go up a little bit. We are trying to scale back some of the life cycle for concrete. We're starting to get ahead of the game, and we don't need to spend the whole $600,000-700,000. So we're asking them to do less.
okay. I move that we approve professional service contracts 2018 annual hard surface and fencing assessment.
Second.
Kim?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eystone voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you. We'll move on to agenda setting for the January 9th meeting. Some of the things that we've talked about, I don't know, Matt, if you're going to be ready in the January 9th meeting for the secondary school update? You think, okay, so we'll add that.
Well, one thing we want to put on for the January 9 meeting is a discussion from the FFA Steering Committee report out. We've had a lot of work, and hopefully we'll have something to bring forward at that time.
One thing that we talked about at the January 9th meeting, Lori and Steve had conversations around this, is having a closed session January 9th to review the superintendent evaluation process, and we would look to do that before the board meeting in a closed session.
Along those lines, I feel we've got to have a discussion on superintendent level 3G4. Is that something, Steve, that would be best done in a closed session, or is that something we could do at a?
You might combine it.
We combine it with that discussion?
We might combine it with that one, put them both in the same one.
Okay, yeah. because I'm sorry, I'm tired of getting my information from Rumor and KCRG.
In October, we talked about transportation changes at the secondary level, and Dr. Hansel isn't here for me to ask him, but at that time, he had said we would get a report back in December. It doesn't, our January 9 meeting's getting a bit long, so I'm wondering if we could put that on for the next meeting. Also, I feel like I need to ask him if that's enough time for him to provide that. I don't know, does anybody know if the Transportation Committee's been meeting to discuss that?
So we had one meeting scheduled that ended up being moved. Joan was ill and not able to make that first meeting, and she was kind of heading that group, in particular with the secondary, the kind of two prongs, activity busing, and then the second piece about moving away or moving towards an attendance support busing model like we've done with the elementary. So really the only topic we've taken on in that meeting format was the activity busing and reviewing what was going on and plans and pilots and what we landed on there. So then this next meeting that is to be held, I believe we're doing this again before break, we'll be really starting that process about moving away from the discretionary to the attendance support busing. So my guess would be by that second meeting in January, we could come back with some information, especially in those two regards. If there's something else, you need specifically from transportation, Craig would have to speak to that. But we should have had a couple meetings in between then to be able to report out to you guys if you're interested.
So maybe if you want to communicate with Joan and, if she feels like that's enough time, that's fine. If you need to meet again in January and you need some more time to develop your recommendation, I just want to make sure that we get to it at some point, we don't forget about it. But February, I think that's all right, just
Sure.
whenever the committee.
Yeah,
is ready.
I think, like I said, I think that second meeting in January, we would have something by that point to either bring a recommendation forward or update you on the progress we're making and when we'd be ready to do that.
Okay, great, thank you.
We had talked about in an earlier topic around attendance zone, having a work session to
Yes,
kick off.
on the 9th, and I was wondering if we might be able to add one other thing to that work session.
Which would be?
Well, it's a start of a discussion on school culture, school expectation and student expectation, and kind of a safety, security discussion. And it's not a one and done, it's just starting a dialogue on some of the conversations that we've been getting from the feedback from our listening posts on those issues. We had our climate survey earlier, and the students that don't feel safe in the building, a discussion on that, and options and discussions at that point. It's kind of a first blush discussion.
It's certainly an important topic, there's no question.
Right.
I'm wondering, though, bundling it is going to give it the proper time and attention that it
Well,
needs.
like I say, I think it's more just a preliminary discussion on it as far as where we want to go with it, and I don't know. It is kind of broad, but I think it's a discussion we need to start before we're forced into a discussion to discuss the topic, and I just want it to get the dialogue started. And I think it's a topic that lends itself to a work session, not necessarily on a board agenda and just a discussion at that point. I don't know. I'll leave it up to you.
Be something that, to discuss at an education committee, as kind of some focus on PBIS and some education to the board of what that is.
We actually talked about that at Policy and Governance. We talked about having some kind of a work session devoted really to multi-tiered systems of support and PBIS specifically, which would include all of that. And we even mentioned maybe, because climate is one of our goals, and we mentioned making Harry at IASB really mad and having a fourth goal, which might even be multi-tiered systems of support, to really focus on, because it's different than climate. It's kind of what's going on in the building. I think Education Committee is a good place to do that, having another, we're going to have to devote some heavy lifting, and I think we all need to learn about it ourselves, like what's happening for PBIS, what does multi-tiered systems of support look like. So whether we begin that this is going to take, we need to put some meat into
No,
this.
I understand, and I'm just looking to kind of get the opening push on this, because it's going to be engagement with the community, it's going to be discussions here and bringing in outside people in it. And I think it's, you know, if we want to start it at the Ed Committee and then it goes to a work session or something like that, but I think it's going to be the type of thing we're going to want to have a lot of community comment and input on it, and the work session might be the best place for that.
So let's start with Education Committee on the 19th, add this item there.
Well, that's
as-
pretty quick, though.
But I mean, I think this is
Is
to
that,
get-
okay,
to
no,
get us
I-
kicked
well, okay.
off and
If-
what's our
if
process
it's-
and how do we want to
If it's
handle
okay
it
with
and-
staff, I think that's fine.
Well, a big piece is us getting educated, and they know this stuff, and they're going to be able to let us know.
So if
I would
that's
assume
too
that you guys
soon,
could-
understand, I mean, was assuming we were just going to sort of get grounded, what's the work that we want to do, what's the process look like?
What's happening already?
Yeah.
We kind of, I guess what I see is two big items that night already, with the castle and with,
Castle.
I think especially the Students Against Hate and Discrimination is going to be a big conversation. So, you know, I guess hearing what you're talking about, there's a lot of different pieces to what that conversation could look like. And so I guess if we want to put it on the 19th, we could be ready. If you want to just have a conversation about what you'd like us to come back with,
I think
that might
that's-
make
I
some
think
sense.
that
And then we could come
grounds
back in
us.
January to say, okay, here's what you guys are looking for, and we could maybe flesh out what you guys are just talking about now, and then in January, we can come back with some more presentation materials and topics for conversation in that piece. But I think if you wanted us to have something ready to go on the 19th, that'd be quite a quick turnaround.
That was not what I was thinking.
Okay.
I was thinking it was more getting grounded on what we need, what our process would look like, that kind of thing. So a conversation around next steps, really.
Great.
To start us. Anything else from an agenda standpoint? All right, I think we're done. I was remiss earlier in the meeting announcing the new artwork behind us from Horn and Borlaug, so my apologies for not recognizing the student artwork earlier in the meeting. If there are no other topics, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.